Chapter 377. The land from the woods to the warehouse was flat and empty. There was only breeze and sunshine in the morning of Huating. The sun fell on this empty flat land. Light and shadows coexisted, and it was eerily quiet. Li Tianlan stood at the edge of the woods and stared calmly at every corner nearby. This maneuver was simple to the point of boredom, but destined to be bloody. Because there were only enemies, it was impossible to waste too much time. Unless Li Tianlan wanted to hide in the dark and attack them one by one. Li Tianlan didn't want to waste time. He didn't want to waste time. And Wang Shengxiao, who had an absolute advantage in strength and number, obviously didn't want to waste time. This was the best place for the maneuver. Li Tianlan silently adjusted his breath. He held the soft branch in his hand. The branch was very long, and its tip hung on the ground. He took a step forward. The branch with its tip hanging on the ground rubbed against the ground. In an instant, there seemed to be the sound of thousands of long swords being unsheathed echoing between heaven and earth. The branch rubbed against the ground with the sound of metal rubbing. For a moment, in different corners of the warehouse, the teaching building, the flat land, the woods, there seemed to be different people drawing their swords. They drew their swords, but there was no sword energy. Only a sword intent that was so indiscernible that it could not be felt swept across the entire space. On the teaching building, Wang Shengxiao, who was holding a telescope, suddenly stiffened on the spot. The sword intent swept past him. In the blink of an eye, Wang Shengxiao's breath began to fall rapidly from the peak to the bottom, and then disappeared completely. His breathing was slowing down, and even his heartbeat became indistinct. Jiang Shangyu stood near Wang Shengxiao and also suppressed all his aura. The branch was still rubbing against the ground. The sword intent that filled every corner of heaven and earth kept spreading, gathering and spreading. The completely uncatchable sword intent kept flowing between illusion and reality. Li Tianlan moved faster and faster. Crack. In front of Wang Shengxiao, the famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai, Firmament, which weighed hundreds of kilograms, shook. Wang Shengxiao's eyes focused, and he held the sword hilt tightly. The heavy sword suddenly became stable in the invisible sword intent all over the sky. The illusory but real sword intent spread through every floor of the teaching building. It seemed to find nothing and finally left the teaching building slowly. Wang Shengxiao's breath began to rise again. He held the sword hilt in his hand and looked at Jiang Shangyu. Both of their eyes were solemn. Invincible realm experts were never afraid of ambushes. Within the range of their domain, nothing could hide. The same was true for invincible realm experts who did not cultivate the domain and took another path. Wherever their sword wills passed, they could also see through any disguise. Li Tianlan had the combat capability of the invincible realm. In terms of the quality of sword intent, he was already in the invincible realm, so he naturally had some invincible realm means. However, his realm was still a little low, so his sword intent couldn't find Wang Shengxiao and Jiang Shangyu, who had hidden their breaths. But how could the others hide? Li Tianlan kept moving forward. He had already reached the flat ground between the forest and the warehouse. The sound of soft branches rubbing against the ground grew louder and louder. Wang Shengxiao's face darkened. He hesitated, picked up the walkie-talkie, and was about to say something. Li Tianlan suddenly lifted the branch that was rubbing against the ground. In an instant, the illusory sound of countless swords being unsheathed suddenly disappeared. However, the sound of a sword being unsheathed could be heard from every corner of the warehouse. Swords flew out uncontrollably from the surrounding dark corners. Behind each sword was an elite that was lying in ambush in the corner. Snap! Li Tianlan flicked the leaf he had picked from the branch into the sky. The leaf was swaying in the air. At this moment, Wang Shengxiao, who instinctively felt that something was wrong, subconsciously raised his binoculars and looked at the leaf that was flicked by Li Tianlan. The leaf was very small, green, and soft. There was no killing intent or sword intent floating in the air. Wang Shengxiao suddenly realized that he seemed to be retarded for a moment. He suddenly lowered the binoculars and tried to lock on Li Tianlan. But Li Tianlan had already disappeared. His speed of advance had not been fast, but the moment when countless swords flew into the sky, his body directly tightened. He strode wildly. Unimaginable power seeped into the ground from his feet. The whole warehouse and the teaching building seemed to be roaring and trembling. Li Tianlan moved like lightning and rushed directly to the corner closest to him. Everything happened in a flash. A hand reached out from the corner. He seemed to realize that his sword had flown into the sky and wanted to reach out to grab it. But the hand he grabbed was the other hand. Their hands were clasped together as if they were shaking hands, but the huge force unhesitatingly broke his arm, pulling up the elite member of the Blizzard team who had been hiding in the dark. Li Tianlan's expression was calm and indifferent. There was no fanaticism, no ferociousness, and no killing intent. He was just calm, indifferent, and superior. He clenched his fist. He waved his fist. Under the severe pain, all the fierceness of the elite of the Blizzard broke out completely. His long sword, which was brought into the sky by Li Tianlan's sword intent, had fallen. The elite of the Blizzard suddenly roared. His whole body tightened, and the scorching temperature spread all over his body. The moment he fell into Li Tianlan's hands, he did not show the slightest timidity. He seemed to want to fully break out his strength of the fire-flaming realm and fight desperately. The temperature was rising. His body glowed with light. But it was not fire. It was extremely red and mournful blood light. Li Tianlan punched him directly in the heart. Amidst the muffled sounds, every muscle on his enormous body seemed to burst into a bloody mist. The blood mist rose. Li Tianlan loosened his hand and kicked him away casually. This kick seemed to be very light because it was too casual. But the elite of the Blizzard who was kicked away seemed to have a bomb hidden in his body. All the power burst out in his body. His body flew up in the air, and before it landed, it was directly shattered into pieces of flesh and blood. Everyone saw this scene through the big screen. The entire grandstand was in an uproar. Those who could come to watch the maneuver were not ordinary people. At least the death of a person would not make a fuss. But the elite students in the maneuver of the two academies were kicked into a pile of flesh and blood. Such a cruel method still shocked everyone. Everyone seemed to feel Li Tianlan's suppressed anger and resentment. But on the screen his eyes were still calm. The rain of blood fell behind him. Li Tianlan took a step and changed his direction. Like a phantom under the sun, he silently rushed across the distance of tens of meters, and appeared in another corner. In another corner, an elite of the Shadow Organization had gotten up and was ready to move, but there was a shadow above his head. He looked up in astonishment. From bottom to top he did not see Li Tianlan's calm and indifferent face. In his sight, there was only a foot that was getting bigger and bigger. The lines on the sole of the leather shoes were constantly magnified in his eyes. Bang! Li Tianlan stepped his head into his chest with one foot. Blood spurted out from his body like a fountain, streaked across the sky, and left a string of blood sparkling with dreamy colors in the sun. The long sword that was guided to the sky by his sword intent finally began to fall. Li Tianlan moved. The open space in front of the warehouse moved, and the atmosphere suddenly changed. The scorching sun did not seem to rise, but the surrounding environment directly became extremely hot. A deep and steady voice abruptly resounded in every corner of the vicinity. Shadow Blizzard. Formation. Li Tianlan paused for a while and slowly raised his head. The still bright but dazzling light shone down from the sky. Invisible heat waves continued to rise, and the sky became blurred. The heat twisted the air, and everything in sight became vague. On the flat ground, countless fallen leaves were set on fire in the blazing sword intent and rushed to the sky. The fire began to occupy all consciousness. Amidst the countless fluttering flames, a verdant green leaf was leisurely descending. It fell in the twisted air. It fell in the burning leaves. It was still falling. It kept falling. In the maneuver area where the heat waves were rising, the air was slightly twisted. A burly and handsome figure appeared above the warehouse. He stood in the air, holding the broad-bladed long sword in his hand tightly, and his breath was wild. The moment his figure appeared, the whole sky seemed to be on fire. The dazzling blue lightning lit up on his sword edge and danced wantonly. The fire and lightning intertwined wildly, rising in every corner and occupying all the space. There was fire everywhere. There was thunder everywhere. The sword intent whistled. Above the light, there was only a cold and arrogant voice resounding on the flat ground in front of the warehouse, and on the number 3 stand through the big screen. Chen Moshua, leader of Blizzard, send your highness to hell. Boom. Fire and lightning interweaved, occupying everyone's field of vision as they fell from the sky in a frenzy. Li Tianlan could not see Chen Moshue, who was going to send him to hell. Chen Moshue could not see Li Tianlan either. But the sword intent of the fire and lightning had already enveloped everything. So what if he could not see it? He raised his long sword high, and his voice shook the sky. Kill. Crack. Wang Tianzong sat in his seat without any expression. His eyes were still calm, but his palms were exerting force quietly, and he unconsciously crushed the armrest of his seat. Heaven Punishment Sword Formation. It's Heaven Punishment Sword Formation. On the stand, next to Zhuang Huayang, the principal of the Sky Academy, a very senior old general cried out involuntarily. Heaven Punishment Sword Formation. One sword to kill the sky. No one thought that there was anything exaggerated about this statement. The Heaven Punishment Troop could be said to be the most elite conventional troop of the Wang family of Beihai. When the whole troop gathered, its deterrent power was even far greater than that of ordinary invincible realm experts. The number of people in the Heaven Punishment Troop was always controlled at 300. Every time one person died, another person would be added. There were always 300 people, no more and no less. But these were 300 people with the lowest strength at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. The Heaven Punishment Troop consisted of 5 people in a squad, 15 people in a squadron, and 150 people in a battalion. There were 20 squadrons in total. The Heaven Punishment Sword Formation was a sword formation on the scale of a squadron. Each squadron could form an independent Heaven Punishment Sword Formation, but independent sword formations could be connected with each other through special sword intent. When the whole Heaven Punishment Troop gathered together, 15 people in a formation, 20 sword formations were connected with each other, and the sword intent of 300 experts with the lowest strength at the peak of the fire-flaming realm gathered into one sword. Why couldn't that sword strike kill the sky? This is indeed the starting move of the Heaven Punishment Sword Formation. The old general stared at the screen intertwined with fire and lightning and laughed at himself. The Wang family of Beihai really put in a lot of effort. Although the number of people in this group is small, their average strength is very good, almost as good as the formation of the real Heaven Punishment Troop. Is it useful? Zhuang Huayang sat quietly and looked calm. Those involved can't see clearly. It's a pity. The old general was stunned. He subconsciously glanced at Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyin not far away. The two most powerful men in Zhongzhou State looked tense and expressionless. On a small screen that was temporarily separated from the big screen, Gu Hanshan was rushing to the warehouse at full speed with dozens of elites. Indeed. The old general nodded. It's a pity. Fire and lightning intertwined like a waterfall. The messy sword intent kept gathering in the waterfall-like light curtain, getting stronger and stronger. The light filled every corner. In the shadow. In the corner. One by one, the elites who ambushed around the warehouse in advance slowly appeared. Led by Chen Moshue, 15 elites with the lowest strength at the fire-flaming realm quietly surrounded Li Tianlan in the center. Your Highness, please go to hell. In the waterfall-like light curtain, Chen Moshue's voice shook the lightning and raging fire. Countless sword intent condensed into a sword. The sword light and the light curtain intertwined. With his voice, the violent light curtain tore the sky in an instant and roared down like a furious dragon. Your Highness, please go to hell. Your Highness, please go to hell? There was a ripple in Li Tianlan's eyes. The ripple gradually expanded and finally turned into a touch of arrogance. The arrogance turned into a wild laugh. The wild laughter penetrated the light curtain and sword intent, with an indescribable frivolity and violence. Send me to hell? Who deserves it? Li Tianlan laughed wildly and reached out his hand. He put his fingers together like a sword. Under the mighty light curtain, an extremely bright and dazzling light suddenly appeared. Who deserves it? Boom. The wild thunder was mighty and the lightning, which had almost faded from blue to pure white, was constantly blooming in Li Tianlan's hands. 24 moves of sword. The first blade, Wuji. The moment the Wuji sword intent appeared, the sword intent changed instantly. The first blade turned into the fifth blade. The fifth blade, flying snow. It never snowed under the July sun in Huiting. But a bone-chilling killing intent and brutality suddenly spread out with Li Tianlan as the center. The 5th blade turned again. The 16th blade, wild thunder. Amidst the bone-chilling coldness, the sound of thunder reverberated throughout the world. Li Tianlan's palms suddenly closed. He clenched his fists. A punch hit the sky. Boom. The 1st blade, the 5th blade, and the 16th blade. The sword intent of the 3 swords were connected. The completely blazing white lightning was released wildly with Li Tianlan as the center in an instant. The blazing white lightning tore the light curtain with sharp sword intent. A wave of air swept across the flat ground in front of the warehouse. The wave of air swept across the edge of the forest with the vast lightning. With a loud bang, countless trees turned into powder in an instant. The chaotic light was dissipating. The moment the light curtain of the heaven-punishing sword formation was broken, Chen Mashue's calm voice sounded, with a touch of determination and tragedy. Heaven punishment. After the light curtain collapsed, it was the sword. More than a dozen sword intents gathered into a giant sword phantom hundreds of meters long. Chen Mashue of the Blizzard team, with a sword, merged with the giant sword phantom in an instant. He and the sword became one. Between heaven and earth, there seemed to be a brilliant flowing light flashing under the bright sun. The flowing light was silent, but with overwhelming killing intent. It rushed directly to Li Tianlan. The flowing light was tall and broad. Its tail was still in the sky, but its front had already reached Li Tianlan. Chen Mashue's figure merged into the flowing light, and the sword intent was bursting. Li Tianlan, whose eyes were completely wild, still reached out his hand. He opened his 5 fingers. The sword intent flowed in his 5-finger sword, subtle but extremely fierce and violent. The 21st blade, shatter of land. The subtle sword intent instantly rushed up to the sky. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his hand. In an instant, the flowing light and the sword intent rushing up to the sky shattered and exploded. Endless light swept across the sky and the earth. In the chaotic light and shadow, Li Tianlan's palm kept moving up. The sword intent of the flowing light pierced his arm, and his palm was covered with blood. Blood gushed from the corner of his mouth and dripped on his white shirt, like a blooming plum blossom. The shatter of land and river and the heaven punishment. Chen Mashue's figure held the sword in the air and stabbed straight down. Li Tianlan's palm rose. At the moment when his sword intent broke out, Li Tianlan grabbed his neck fiercely. Do you deserve it? Li Tianlan grabbed Chen Mashue's neck and asked in a cold tone. Chen Mashue looked at Li Tianlan, who was bleeding from the corner of his mouth, in disbelief. At this moment, he was not thinking about why he failed. He suddenly thought of a very ridiculous question. Li Tianlan broke the heaven-punishing sword formation with his bare hands at the cost of injury. But before that, he clearly saw the branch in Li Tianlan's hand. If that was his weapon, where did the branch go? Chapter 378. Chen Mashue had thought of many possibilities. Li Tianlan was very strong. He had the combat capability of the invincible realm at the age of 22. In this maneuver, no one was his opponent in a one-on-one fight. Chen Mashue knew very well that even if he had the heaven punishment sword formation, it would be difficult to send Li Tianlan to hell. After all, his strength was a little weak. The strength of the members of the sword formation was also a little weak. The real heaven punishment sword formation was centered by a real expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, assisted by 2 experts of the thunder-shocking realm, and other experts of the fire-flaming realm. After the sword intent was condensed, the heaven punishment sword formation was almost no less than the full blow of the top expert of the half-step invincible realm. Now the strength of the heaven punishment sword formation formed by Chen Mashue was uneven. He himself was also a long way from the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. In such a sword formation, the sword move he exerted was at most infinitely close to the half-step invincible realm. Naturally, such a sword move could not kill Li Tianlan. But according to Chen Mashue's expectation, this sword move could at least seriously injure Li Tianlan. After all, according to the information they received, Li Tianlan had fought Gu Qianchuan and Gu Xingyin a few days ago. He was injured and was not in his peak state at all. Even if Li Tianlan broke their sword formation, he was bound to pay the price. Chen Moshue had thought of too many scenes after Li Tianlan was injured. At the moment, Li Tianlan was indeed injured. Blood flowed down the corner of Li Tianlan's mouth. The sword energy of the heaven punishment sword seemed to tear the skin on his arm. The red blood spread along the cuff and dyed Li Tianlan's entire palm red. Li Tianlan's essence, qi, and spirit did not decline at all. Instead, he became crazier and colder. He exerted a little force in his palm, grabbed Chen Moshue's neck, and lifted him up directly. Chen Moshue's face gradually turned purple, and he had difficulty breathing. He struggled subconsciously. In his sight, Li Tianlan's eyes were bloodshot, and the blood densely occupied the whites of his eyes. His eyes were scarlet. It was an indescribable violence and demonic. Wild, cold, fierce, irritable, without the so-called reason and thinking. At this moment, Li Tianlan was full of an indescribable strangeness and demonic nature. Chen Moshue spat out a mouthful of blood. He wanted to laugh, but he was extremely aggrieved. What had the heaven-punishing sword formation, which was regarded as one of the trump cards of the drill, done? It just left some superficial injuries on Li Tianlan. Oh, maybe he even broke a branch? This was the result of the battle? What made Chen Moshue most aggrieved was that the so-called heaven punishment sword formation was just a starting move. The sword formation had just been formed when it was broken. No words could describe the absurdity in Chen Moshue's heart. When the shadow of the giant sword pressed down on Li Tianlan like a flowing light, the sword intent of the shattering land was released in his hand. It was so subtle, yet so fierce and fast. The blood-stained palm tore apart the sword intent of the giant sword in an instant. When the heaven punishment sword was about to reach its peak, the palm directly grabbed his neck and pulled him down. Heaven punishing sword. The light curtain at the beginning was not, nor was the shadow of the giant sword. The real sky punishment sword was Chen Moshue's own sword as the core of the sword formation. The sword was interrupted by Li Tianlan at the most subtle moment when it was close to the peak. The slightest error could lead to a huge error. It was so exaggerated that it was like a coincidence. What was more exaggerated was that Chen Moshue did not feel Li Tianlan's sword intent or his power during the whole process. It seemed that the other party just stretched out his hand, and then everything was over. How did you? Li Tianlan's palm was getting tighter and tighter. Chen Moshue held Li Tianlan's palm tightly, and his voice was hoarse and distorted. Li Tianlan glanced at him. His eyes were cold and indifferent. Li Tianlan lifted Chen Moshue's hand and suddenly smashed Chen Moshue's body into the ground. Plop! It was not the dull sound of the body falling to the ground. Li Tianlan took the opportunity to smash Chen Moshue's body as if it had been smashed directly into the water. A faint blue light appeared on the ground silently. The light continued to refract, spread, and converged with each other. That was the most violent lightning. But at this moment, the lightning was like water gathering, hard and soft. Countless rays of light intertwined into the water surface, which dissolved most of the power that Li Tianlan had exerted on Chen Moshue. Blood kept gushing from the corners of Chen Moshue's mouth. The heaven punishment sword was interrupted by Li Tianlan at the most subtle moment. The sword intent did not pour out, but directly exploded in his body. Li Tianlan's power, which had been dissolved by more than half, rushed into his body and directly destroyed the balance in his body. Chen Moshue's face was pale, and his aura declined in an instant. The heaven punishment sword did not seriously injure Li Tianlan. Instead, it directly made Chen Moshue lose his combat capability. The water waves gathered by the lightning were still surging, wrapping Chen Moshue and spreading up along his legs. Li Tianlan loosened his hand and turned around abruptly. At the end of the water and lightning, Wang Shengxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, slowly walked over. The heavenly son of Beihai, who had always been modest and gentle, had no smile on his face at this time. His face was expressionless, and his eyes were cold. He held the broad and heavy sword tightly in his hand, and his whole body was surging with sword energy. Li Tianlan's scarlet eyes immediately locked on the vital parts of Wang Shengxiao's body. Let him go. Wang Shengxiao gently raised the giant sword in his hand, looked at Li Tianlan and said in a calm tone. Boundless sword intent whizzed around him and gathered toward the ether sword in his hand. He looked straight into Li Tianlan's eyes, with an irresistible toughness and majesty. Li Tianlan's scarlet eyes grew crazier. He put his palm on the top of Chen Moshue's head. The water like lightning continued to spread along Chen Moshue's body. Li Tianlan's palm also lit up with a touch of blue. And then it turned into blazing white. The blue water waves and the blazing white sword intent, one above the other, were in a stalemate with Chen Moshue's body as the battlefield. Chen Moshue's face suddenly twisted, as if he was suffering great pain. Let him go. Wang Shengxiao's eyes grew colder, and the surging sword intent around him had a touch of killing intent and mania. He had to keep Chen Moshue alive. Chen Moshue was different from ordinary elites. In fact, although his talent was not as good as that of the real young chosen one, it was not much worse. In the vast Deep Sea Academy, except for Jiang Shangyu's 3000 World and Song Sea's Phantom, the Blizzard was the most powerful organization. Chen Moshue took the initiative to approach him, and the Wang family of Beihai had no reason to let go of such a talent. This was the era of the Chosen One. But under the brilliance of the Chosen One, other people might shine. In the era of Wang Tianzong, Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun, there would also be figures like Dongqing Wudi, Situt Songyue, Gu Qianchuan, and the Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu. With Chen Moshue's talent, 10 years later, he could definitely grow into a top superior of the half-step invincible realm. Such a person would definitely be the most important in the team Wang Shengxiao would set up in the future. You. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Shengxiao and sneered. His voice was a little weird, a little stiff and hollow, but it sounded from all directions, grand and indifferent. Wang Shengxiao glanced at Chen Moshue. The two looked at each other for a moment. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his palm. The blazing white lightning gathered in his palm. 21st blade shatter of land. Kill. The moment the sword intent broke out in Li Tianlan's palm, Wang Shengxiao suddenly raised the giant sword in his hand. Chen Moshue's face was completely distorted, and he suddenly roared. The lightning and water waves that wrapped his body faded. Chen Moshue's whole body was spurting blood. The blood shone with a mournful red luster, with wisps of sword intent. That was the sky-punishing sword intent that exploded in Chen Moshue's body. In an instant, the sword intent in the blood and the water like lightning blended with each other. In every corner, the elites of Blizzard and Phantom drew their swords at the same time. Wang Shengxiao's figure appeared in the sky, and the dark giant sword pointed at Li Tianlan with a cold light. In an instant, it seemed that all the sword intent madly gathered toward Wang Shengxiao's body. Sky punishing. Wang Shengxiao's loud and majestic voice rang out like thunder. The surging sword intent rose from the bottom to the top, and the whole world turned into a dazzling blue in the blink of an eye. The roaring thunder rolled down from the sky. The sun retreated under the blue sword intent, and it rained heavily in the sky. The blue sword rain. Li Tianlan broke Chen Moshue's sky-punishing sword formation. But Chen Moshue was still there, and so was the incomplete sword formation. Wang Shengxiao's appearance directly replaced Chen Moshue as the new core of the sky-punishing sword formation, and Chen Moshue, who was seriously injured, became a support with the remaining sky-punishing sword intent. This sword strike was abrupt and violent. The sword rain fell and gathered. Wang Shengxiao's figure was getting higher and higher, and this sword was out of everyone's sight. His figure disappeared in an instant. The torrential rain directly gathered together with the messy sword intent. The sword rain merged, and everyone's sword intent completely gathered together, turning into a beam of blue light that was so bright that it could run through the sky and the earth. One end of the beam was the sky, and the other end was Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan suddenly put his hands together. The sword intent of the shattering of land kept blooming between his hands, and the blazing white light intertwined in front of him, turning into a light curtain. The torrential rain turned into a beam of light, and the beam of light shone straight down and fell on the light curtain. The whole light curtain suddenly shook, and a lot of blood spilled behind the light curtain. Li Tianlan's blood. Boom. Countless sword intents surged together and exploded directly. The blazing white light curtain was shattered in an instant, and the beam of light formed by the sword rain completely disappeared. In the messy light and shadow, Li Tianlan's clothes were completely torn, and his whole body was covered with blood. His face was pale, and a wound on his forehead kept spurting blood. The blood covered his face, making him look extremely ferocious. Ah! Li Tianlan's eyes were scarlet, and he suddenly roared. He suddenly tore off his torn shirt, and roared with all his strength. Blood flowed down from his body. At this moment, Li Tianlan was like a wounded beast, with no sense left, only madness. The sword intent of the shattering of land flowed in his hands, and changed instantly. The 14th blade slaughter. The crazy killing intent spread all over the sky with the awe-inspiring flashing sword light. The shattering of land was the sword of shattering. The 14th blade was the heart of slaughter. The two sword intents merged with each other and superimposed to form a new sword. The 17th blade, Azura. All the blood dripping down from Li Tianlan's body floated in the air at the same time. The blood gathered into a scarlet sword in front of him. Li Tianlan, who was like a bloody man, suddenly reached out and held the blood sword in his hand. In an instant, the endless blood-colored sword light suddenly burst out. The sword light rose above the ground, like a bloody tide surging with killing intent. Wang Shengxiao's figure appeared in the sky. He held the hilt of firmament tightly with both hands and fell straight down from the top. His figure was so far away, so clear. There was no sword light, no faint blue. There was only one person and one sword. Falling. Sprinting. His speed was getting faster and faster. The dark firmament rubbed against the air, igniting flames, and then the flames were extinguished under the high speed. A sword intent so grand that it almost didn't exist directly covered with Wang Shengxiao's figure. A faint blue dot burned on the blade of firmament. Twinkle, twinkle, twinkle. The flickering blue dot was very small, but it was as grand as the whole sky. It wasn't that there was no sword intent between heaven and earth. All the sword intent turned into heaven and earth with this heaven punishment sword. The bloody tide rose against the sky. Li Tianlan was as ferocious as a devil, and as crazy as Azura. The heaven punishment sword intent that covered heaven and earth fell directly into the bloody tide. Wang Shengxiao's figure was surrounded by the blood-colored sword light, but for the first time, it was so clear and so majestic. The faint blue dot on firmament became brighter and brighter in the bloody sword light. The half-style samsara he wanted to cultivate failed, and he was seriously injured. Under such circumstances, with the help of the heaven punishment sword formation, this could almost be said to be Wang Shengxiao's strongest sword. The sword intent continued to stack and condense, and this sword steadily entered the half-step invincible realm. It was not an ordinary half-step invincible realm. This was equivalent to Wang Shengxiao's full strength after he entered the half-step invincible realm. It was like heaven and earth were squeezing at the same time. The blood-colored sword light stagnated. The faint blue dot on the blade of firmament expanded instantly. This sword was like heaven and earth, like eternity. The huge blade collided with the bloody sword condensed by blood. The picture seemed to freeze for a moment. The faint blue was no longer flashing. The bloody light was no longer restless. Without a sound, all the sword intent and sword chi shattered one after another. A fierce storm suddenly rose on the flat ground in front of the warehouse. The storm surged and exploded in absolute silence, and the aftermath swept through every corner of the battlefield. Chen Maxue, who was seriously injured and was about to leave the battlefield, and more than a dozen elites of Shadow and the Blizzard were all swallowed by the storm in an instant. The chaotic bloody light rose in the storm, and the broken limbs and corpses were completely broken in the storm. The storm continued to sweep across the flat ground, and rushed into the dense forest. Countless trees were uprooted and broken in the air under the storm. The sword intent was still raging. Boom. After the silent destruction, there was finally a deafening bang. Wang Shengxiao and Li Tianlan spat out a mouthful of blood at the same time. With Li Tianlan as the center, the hard and flat ground suddenly collapsed and became a deep pit. Water stains appeared in the deep pit. The water stains turned into streams and quickly filled the whole pit. The flat ground turned into a pool of water. Li Tianlan's figure was directly blasted out nearly 200 meters in the broken sword intent. He smashed through the thick wall of the warehouse and disappeared from everyone's sight. Wang Shengxiao's figure rushed into the dense forest uncontrollably. A pair of palms suddenly appeared from behind and grabbed Wang Shengxiao. Under the huge impact, the two of them retreated nearly 20 meters before they stopped. Wang Shengxiao spat out a mouthful of blood again. His face was pale, but his eyes were unprecedentedly cold. What's going on? A voice sounded behind Wang Shengxiao. Wang Shengxiao looked up at the person. The person who caught him was Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City. The three young heavenly sons had completely gathered. Wang Shengxiao gritted his teeth and stood up, saying with a smile, Li Tianlan lost. He could be sure of his injury, and he could also be sure of Li Tianlan's injury. One was Li Tianlan without the abnormal protection of the cloud silk robe, and the other was not in the peak state. Facing his peak sword strike, it could be said that both of them were injured. Li Tianlan could still fight. So could Wang Shengxiao. But at this moment, Wang Shengxiao had Gu Hanshan, Jiang Shangyu, and dozens of elite soldiers from the two academies by his side. No matter how strong Li Tianlan was, how could he win when he was seriously injured? Chapter 379. Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan looked in the direction of the warehouse at the same time. The warehouse was very large. The sunlight cast a large shadow around the warehouse. In their sight, there was a huge hole with a diameter of nearly 10 meters in the thick wall. There were dense cracks around the hole, which was the trace of Li Tianlan's body crashing into the warehouse. Wang Shengxiao moved his body. When he was about to speak, he spat out another mouthful of blood. His body trembled slightly, as if he was suffering great pain. He injured Li Tianlan with the Heaven Punishment Sword, but Li Tianlan's sword intent in his body also detonated the injury of trying to practice the half-reincarnation for several days in meditation. Wang Shengxiao's aura suddenly became weak. Wang Shengxiao felt a little regretful. He felt that he had really overestimated Li Tianlan, or underestimated Gu Qianchuan. Even the last invincible realm expert on the holy list was still an invincible realm expert. It should be no problem for him to suppress Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan destroyed one of Gu Qianchuan's arms. How good could he be? Wang Shengxiao decided to practice the half-reincarnation in the last few days of the maneuver, because Li Tianlan's extreme strength disturbed his mind, and made him instinctively ignore the price Li Tianlan had to pay to do all that. Now it seemed that the price Li Tianlan paid for destroying one of Gu Qianchuan's arms was more serious than everyone thought. The treasured cloud silk robe was damaged. Li Tianlan himself was also seriously injured. At this moment, Wang Shengxiao suddenly questioned himself. If he hadn't practiced the half-reincarnation a few days ago, he wouldn't have participated in the maneuver with serious injuries. In this way, the Heaven Punishment Sword just now would have been more powerful. Would a stronger sword directly take Li Tianlan's life and decide the result of the maneuver without Jiang Shangyu and Gu Hanshan's intervention? Wang Shengxiao raised his arm and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He was injured and couldn't exert all his strength. He was seriously injured by my sword just now. Now he is no longer a threat. Wang Shengxiao said calmly. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City united and turned the triennial event in Zhongzhou State into an undisguised murder. At this point, no one had a reason to retreat. The firmament in Wang Shengxiao's hand suddenly shook. He looked at the broken hole in the warehouse wall and said in a calm but firm tone, "So, let's end this quickly." The firmament was dragged on the ground. Wang Shengxiao held the hilt and rushed forward. The heavy sword's edge rubbed against the ground violently, causing sparks to fly. The sparks then turned into flames. It turned into raging fire, and finally into lightning. Wang Shengxiao's speed was getting faster and faster. He was sprinting with all his strength. The firmament sword rushed out of the forest, into the flat ground, and rushed to the warehouse. Wherever the huge blade passed, it left a huge ravine that was hundreds of meters long. The lightning was like water, wrapping Wang Shengxiao up. The waves surged up and down. Extreme softness. Unyielding. Gu Hanshan followed closely beside Wang Shengxiao. Compared with Wang Shengxiao, whose sword was only violent and fierce, his momentum was grander and more gorgeous. One sword wheel after another spun crazily around him. Hundreds of sword shadows whizzed up and down around him. Dark blue lightning spread around Gu Hanshan. Gu Hanshan rushed forward, but his feet did not move. His whole body seemed to be stepping on a huge sword shadow. As he rode on the sword, countless sword shadows bloomed around him like a blooming flower. The flower kept blooming, and the lightning kept expanding. But Gu Hanshan was surrounded by darkness. It was the 9th secluded impasse in the 8th Supreme Sword Dance. Wang Shengxiao said to end this quickly. Gu Hanshan had no objection at all. He used his strongest sword at the beginning. The focus of the cooperation between the 3000 World and the Phantom Palace was Li Tianlan. Now, if the young forces owned by several of them combined, except for the credits deducted from the combination of forces, it was almost the same as the credits of the East Emperor Palace. Once Li Tianlan died, several young forces would merge and completely block all the paths of the East Emperor Palace, which could be regarded as cutting off the last hope of the Li family. But it was also crucial whether the merged forces were led by Kunlun City or the Wang family of Beihai. The ownership of dominance also depended on the result of this maneuver. Once Li Tianlan died, the competition between the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City would come next. In this way, it would be more like the final team maneuver. Gu Hanshan was clear about this, but at this time he spared no effort and did not intend to take advantage of Wang Shengxiao at all. This time, the two sides joined hands to deal with Li Tianlan, which meant that they had bet on the future reputation of Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan. On such an occasion, competition was competition. There was no calculation or conspiracy. The two rushed all the way forward. In the woods, a large number of elites brought by Gu Hanshan had begun to form a formation. The sword formation of Kunlun City was not as extremely overbearing as the Heaven Punishment sword formation, but it was more complicated and delicate. This sword formation did not need an absolutely strong core, but a balance in all aspects. Therefore, there were more people in this sword formation, and its momentum was more terrifying. This formation might not be able to punish the sky, but it was enough to kill. The final hit formation. Boom. Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan were extremely fast. However, there was someone faster than the two of them, and the distance between them was also shorter. When the two had just rushed half the distance, a roar suddenly sounded on the side of the teaching building near the warehouse. A huge force surged in the teaching building and directly collapsed one side of the building. The dazzling and dangerous lightning surged in the collapsed building. Jiang Shangyu's figure rushed out of the teaching building and directly smashed into the warehouse. His figure stretched to the extreme in the sky, and tens of thousands of thunderbolts burst out with him as the center. Jiang Shangyu's expression was dignified and solemn. He had no sword in his hand. Looking at the warehouse that was getting closer and closer, he directly raised his fist. This was a unique skill that belonged to his family. Thousands of miles of rivers and mountains. The lightning was mighty, and Jiang Shangyu's figure fell at the same time. Jiang Shangyu did not hold back at all. He and Li Tianlan had cooperation. But the premise of all cooperation was that Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu could survive this maneuver. In the whole Zhongzhou state and the world, countless people's eyes were focused on this maneuver area at this time, including the eyes of at least several invincible realm experts. Among them were Zhongzhou State's Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong and Zhongzhou State's God of War Gu Xingyun. Jiang Shangyu punched at the closest distance. How could he hold back? How could he dare to hold back? The frenzied and violent thunderbolts rushed out of the teaching building and smashed the roof of the warehouse immediately. Jiang Shangyu's figure rushed into the warehouse. In an instant, all the thunderbolts around him completely burst out in the most ferocious way. The light with the meaning of destruction turned into a shock wave, sweeping the entire warehouse. The warehouse was full of chaotic and dangerous light. Jiang Shangyu punched out, and the second punch condensed again. The martial arts of the Jiang family only had a pair of iron fists, without sword intent. But in the countless thunderbolts scattered by his punch, he clearly noticed that there was a weak sword energy behind him. Jiang Shangyu's eyes hesitated. Then he suddenly turned around and punched with all his strength again. Picturesque landscape. The violent fist wind raised crazy thunderbolts, and Jiang Shangyu's whole body was full of light. He saw Li Tianlan. But in the twinkling of an eye, Jiang Shangyu's hair stood on end. The picturesque landscape had already been blasted out uncontrollably, with Jiang Shangyu's voice somewhat distorted because of extreme shock. You, bang. Similarly, a fist directly hit Jiang Shangyu's fist. Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan approached the warehouse almost at the same time. A hoarse and fearful roar suddenly came from the warehouse. The The whole warehouse kept shaking and swaying under the extreme force. Countless cracks continued to spread on the warehouse's walls. As soon as Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan stepped into the warehouse, the power in the warehouse suddenly broke out. Boom! There seemed to be a wild thunder in the whole warehouse. The tall and heavy warehouse completely collapsed in an instant in everyone's sight. Huge stones and messy steel bars flew in all directions, and the whole warehouse directly disappeared from everyone's sight. Endless lightning surged out from the collapsed warehouse, bringing with it a blazing white flame that burned everything. Jiang Shangyu's figure was blasted into the teaching building at a speed faster than when he fell. Li Tianlan, whose eyes were red and covered in blood, was almost evil at this time. In the eyes of Gu Hanshan and Wang Shengxiao, it seemed to be madness at the end of the road, but it was also extremely dangerous and silent. Li Tianlan's figure rushed into the teaching building after Jiang Shangyu. In the sky full of thunderbolts and flames, his body was like a scarlet shadow. Save him! Gu Hanshan and Wang Shengxiao said at the same time. For both the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, the Jiang family in Beijiang was valuable enough to rope in. If they could get Jiang Shangyu's loyalty, even if they entered the peak of the divine list in the future, Jiang Shangyu would be their best right-hand man. Such a person was much more valuable than Qin Mashue. How could they not save him? Their figures flashed at the same time, broke through the diffusing flames and thunderbolts, and rushed into the teaching building. Li Tianlan was completely crazy. The thunderbolts and flames seemed to be completely integrated in his hands. He was covered in blood, but his whole body was full of blazing white light. The whole teaching building was shaking. In the space on the third floor, Li Tianlan madly chased after Jiang Shangyu, who was fleeing desperately. There was no word to describe the kind of madness and wildness that made people's scalps numb. Walls, tables and chairs, glass, blackboard, stairs. Everything was completely broken in Li Tianlan's attack. Nothing could stand between him and Jiang Shangyu for even a second. Jiang Shangyu desperately parried, sweeping his legs, elbows, knees, and hooks. The flowing blazing white light burst out with Li Tianlan's every move, and the whole teaching building kept shaking in his attack. In this state, Li Tianlan simply ignored everything. Jiang Shangyu was already covered in blood, but he was pulled over and thrown out by Li Tianlan again and again. This was no longer a battle. It was a brutal killing. A naked brutal killing. The firmament sword was raised in an instant. Sweeping. The thunderbolts, which were like water light, suddenly became extremely fierce and violent. The light was everywhere, and there was no fluctuation. A large light curtain swept toward Li Tianlan in an instant. The sword wheel around Gu Hanshan was fully released, and countless sword shadows extended to the limit. The pseudo-domain of the ninth secluded impasse directly shrouded Li Tianlan with Wang Shengxiao's thunderbolts. Li Tianlan seemed to have completely lost his mind. He suddenly turned around and directly gave up on Jiang Shangyu. With red eyes, he directly pounced on Gu Hanshan. In an instant, Li Tianlan was completely shrouded in the ninth secluded impasse. But ninth secluded impasse was not dark. Instead, there was white light everywhere. 21st blade shatter of land. Shatter of land. Shatter of land. The completely violent sword energy rushed through the light curtain brought by the firmament sword, and shattered the pseudo-domain of the ninth secluded impasse. Covered in blood, Li Tianlan almost instantly arrived in front of Gu Hanshan, who was the only one who was still in his peak state. Countless bloodstains flowed on his body. Li Tianlan suddenly grabbed Gu Hanshan's shoulders with both hands and pressed down. Boom! The ground on the third floor of the teaching building suddenly collapsed. Li Tianlan directly pressed Gu Hanshan into a classroom on the second floor. Gu Hanshan's face was livid, and the sword shadows kept flashing all over him. 7 unique flowing lights. Like a stream of flowing light, he directly rushed out of the classroom along the nearest distance. Bang! With a dull sound, Li Tianlan directly smashed the wall. Once again, he grabbed Gu Hanshan's neck. With a messy sound, the young master of Kunlun City was smashed into another classroom in an extremely embarrassing manner. Countless attacks fell on Gu Hanshan like crazy. Just like when he chased after Jiang Shangyu. The classrooms were completely smashed one after another. Attack, attack, attack. White light lingered in every inch of space and kept bursting around Li Tianlan. Gu Hanshan, who was completely covered in dust, twisted his face and suddenly shouted angrily, "Get lost!" 5 elements annihilation. 5 sword intents that he had accumulated for a long time, surrounded Li Tianlan, and fell fiercely. "Go to hell." With a ferocious face, Gu Hanshan broke out with all his strength. The 8th supreme sword move suddenly rotated and chopped around Li Tianlan. The 9th secluded impasse covered everything, and the 3 elements annihilation took shape in the darkness. A dense sword shadow rushed directly into the 9th secluded impasse, along with the sword shadow. At the same time as the sword shadow rushed into the pseudo-domain, there was also a majestic thunderbolt. Jiang Shangyu and Wang Shengshao appeared here at the same time. The moment Li Tianlan was shrouded in the pseudo-domain, they attacked mercilessly. Gu Hanshan's face was gloomy and cold. A dagger slowly slid down his cuff. The thunderbolt spread quickly on the blade of the broken sword. Pseudo-domain, sword shadow, thunderbolt. Everything kept exploding around Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan trembled violently all over. Gu Hanshan sneered, raised his hand, and directly threw out the dagger in his hand. The thunderbolt of the dagger bloomed in the pseudo-domain. The 9th secluded impasse suddenly exploded. More blood sprinkled down in a mess of light and shadow. The crumbling teaching building was completely quiet. When the light dissipated, when the dust settled, everyone saw the final result of this sword strike. Li Tianlan, who was known as the heavenly son of Zhongzhou State, twitched all over. Under the siege of 3 people, Gu Hanshan's last sword pierced through his abdomen. The dagger drove his body and nailed him to the wall. There was an uproar in the number 3 stand. No one was surprised. Almost all of them only had doubts on their faces. There was some commotion in the 40,000 troops, but Dongqing Wudi was still expressionless. An old patriarch of a wealthy and powerful family in the southeast slowly walked to the front of the stand and sat down. He said with a smile, "Little Han, I heard that you invested a lot of money in the East Emperor Palace?" "Yes, a lot." Han Donglu, the founder of the Flourishing Age Fund, sat in the same row as Wang Tianzong and others and smiled gently. The old patriarch sneered, looking at the financial tycoon who almost suffocated him in his own base camp, and said sarcastically, "You also have a time when your investment fails? That's rare. I have investments in the 3000 world and phantom world. I will earn them back." Han Donglu was calm and collected. "But you supported Li Tianlan. That means you offended His Majesty Sword Emperor and Gu Xingyun." The old patriarch patted Han Donglu on the shoulder and said meaningfully, "When Li Tianlan dies, you won't get anything from the layout of the special warfare system for the next few decades. The money you invested in the East Emperor Palace will be wasted." "What if Li Tianlan doesn't die?" Han Donglu asked indifferently. The old patriarch subconsciously glanced at Li Tianlan, who was nailed to the wall, and said disdainfully, "Is it possible? If Tianzong and Xingyun are as narrow-minded as you, the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City don't need to develop. My investment in the East Emperor Palace is a normal investment. If I fail, I will lose a little. If he really wins, it will be a big profit." Han Donglu's tone was indifferent. "Win?" The old patriarch sneered. "How can that boy win?" Han Donglu looked at Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun, who were a few seats away. In his sight, Gu Xingyun's face became more and more gloomy, but the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State had closed his eyes. Han Donglu glanced at the old patriarch and gently raised the corner of his mouth. "Aha. Those who think Tianlan is a little weak, don't worry." Chapter 380. No one could have imagined such a scene. Before the maneuver began, no one, including Wang Shengshao, Gu Hanshan, and Jiang Shangyu, expected that Li Tianlan, who was already the strongest of the young generation in Zhongzhou State, would be nailed to the wall by a sword. They never underestimated their strength, especially Wang Shengshao and Gu Hanshan. One had wind and thunder veins and the other had heavenly king heart. They had the best physical quality, the most perfect training breakthrough, and the most powerful inheritance. All of these could make them break out the combat capability far beyond the same realm. Both of them were at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but they were already qualified to look down on a considerable number of superiors of the half-step invincible realm. Jiang Shangyu's reputation was not as good as the first two, but in everyone's mind he was not a weakling either. He had been in the half-step thundershocking realm for 3 years, and broke through to the stabilization phase of the thundershocking realm, which was enough to show that his potential was equally strong. If the three of them joined forces, they could even fight against Li Tianlan, who had the combat capability of the invincible realm. Furthermore, they had also prepared 2 sword formations that were equally powerful. All of this was well prepared, which showed the absolute importance they attached to Li Tianlan. In this maneuver, both Gu Hanshan and Wang Xingxiao were ready to pay a great price, and they were even ready to stagnate in their martial arts realm for a few years. Li Tianlan was extremely powerful. They weren't weak either. Comparing the strength of both sides, they had at least a 50 to 60% chance of winning. This was enough for them to make up their minds to participate in this exercise. But they didn't expect everything to go so smoothly. Without the protection of the cloud silk robe, Li Tianlan was not at his peak. In this state, Li Tianlan still caused them a lot of losses and troubles in all the victories. But compared with their expectations, such losses and troubles were much smaller. Wang Shengxiao was seriously injured. Both Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu had internal injuries of varying degrees. But Li Tianlan was nailed to the wall by Gu Hanshan's sword. All the tables and chairs in the classroom had been completely smashed, and the walls had collapsed, bringing up a large amount of dust. Dust fell and rose again. Countless ashes fell on Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood. The short sword thrown by Gu Hanshan was still shaking. Li Tianlan's body seemed to be suffering great pain, twitching slightly with the vibration of the dagger. Dust and blood covered his body. Li Tianlan was very dirty and looked extremely embarrassed. This was the Li family's last hope. They were the enemies most likely to threaten the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City in the next few decades. He was the heavenly son of Zhongzhou State. But now, the prodigy was nailed to the wall, covered in dirt and dust. He looked so pitiful, so petty, so weak. Wang Xingxiao remained calm. Jiang Shangyu remained calm. Gu Hanshan's expression was calm, but there was a kind of undisguised cruelty and coldness in his eyes. The combat capability of the invincible realm at the age of 22. This was the biggest shadow that shrouded their hearts, and it almost made them despair. But now, the shadow that made them feel the most despair was pinned in front of them, heavily injured and on the verge of death. The shadow in his heart was gradually fading. The three of them seemed to have become purer and purer. Vaguely, Wang Shengxiao saw his way to the half-step invincible realm. Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu also gained something. Thank you. Wang Shengxiao broke the silence. He looked at Li Tianlan and said in a simple and calm tone. He looked at Li Tianlan. This was the young man of the same generation that he admired and even respected the most. They won the exercise. But Wang Shengxiao didn't feel happy. He felt a little regretful. But he would not regret it. Li Tianlan might not have died here. But Wang Shengxiao knew that he had no choice. His hands and shoulders shouldered not only the firmament, but also the Wang family of Beihai. In the months to come, he would have to experience too many involuntary and unwilling situations. But he would no longer have a choice. Li Tianlan's eyes gradually dimmed. Wang Shengxiao looked at him silently. He wanted to say a lot, but he didn't want to say anything. At this moment, it seemed that whatever he said would be a mockery. But there was only respect in Wang Xingxiao's heart. He looked at him quietly, and his eyes were a little bleak. It's all thanks to you that I can gain something today. Gu Hanshan looked at Li Tianlan. The cruelty and coldness in his eyes gradually turned into a somewhat twisted smile. Go in peace. He said, Zhongzhou State will have me and the Gu family in the future. We don't need the glory of the Li family. The corners of his mouth couldn't help curling up, and his killing intent was awe-inspiring. It seemed that everyone had forgotten. The young man who was nailed to the wall by him was the 9th on the world divine list. This ranking might be exaggerated, but Li Tianlan's name had always been on the divine list. Today he nailed an expert on the divine list to the wall. Gu Hanshan's eyes were a little ferocious. He glanced at Wang Shengxiao, and then at Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu shrugged and didn't speak. I'll do it. Gu Hanshan's eyes fell on Wang Shengxiao again. His meaning was clear. He wanted to send Li Tianlan to hell in person. Whatever. Wang Shengxiao was a little dispirited. Gu Hanshan walked over slowly. Li Tianlan's eyes grew dimmer. The scarlet in his eyes gradually faded, and his black eyeballs gradually expanded. After the scarlet color disappeared, Li Tianlan's eyes instantly became dark, and no white could be seen. In Gu Hanshan's perception, Li Tianlan's vitality was rapidly fading. But a sword intent suddenly rose in the classroom. He suddenly reached out and held the dagger nailed to him. His eyes were still dim. His life was still passing. His aura was still weakening. All the glory and hope of the Li family seemed to have completely gone to the bottom after a short period of madness. Li Tianlan directly pulled out the dagger. Blood gushed out. His body fell to the ground. The moment his aura was extremely weak, the sword intent that suddenly rose in the classroom suddenly became extremely violent. Watch out! Jiang Shangyu and Wang Shengxiao's faces changed dramatically, and they roared in unison. Without any hesitation, the two of them directly took action. Li Tianlan held the dagger and stood up straight. His eyes were pitch black, with an indescribable silence and darkness. All his vitality seemed to be transformed into the most violent sword intent by him in the blink of an eye. The blazing white flame and the wild thunder surged without warning with Li Tianlan as the center. The sword intent swept through the air. The whole space twisted violently. A storm suddenly rose in the whole teaching building, overturning the mess in the classroom and lifting the ceiling. The blazing white fire raged wildly in the wind in an instant, but the lightning suddenly condensed in one place. Li Tianlan raised the dagger. The blazing white lightning kept jumping around the dagger, and then instantly turned into the most dazzling blue. Everything happened too fast. Li Tianlan just raised the dagger. The sword energy seemed to reach its peak directly without any short accumulation. The shining blue lightning was completely filled by the sword energy, and it continued to expand in the blazing white fire. The sword energy was mighty. It was not sharp, not sinister. There was only an irresistible strength and majesty. The Wang family of Beihai, sort of emperor path. The fire was like a raging wave. The lightning entwined with the sword energy followed the fire closely, and almost instantly rushed to Gu Hanshan. Gu Hanshan's reaction was not slow at all. Li Tianlan had begun to retreat as soon as he raised the dagger in his hand. A large expanse of sword light wandered around him, and sword wheels rose up and surrounded Gu Hanshan. This was pure defense and retreat. The condensed sword of Emperor Path suddenly exploded in the thunder and fire. Gu Hanshan, who retreated in a hurry, and Wang Shengxiao and Jiang Shangyu, who acted in a hurry, were directly shrouded by the sword intent. The storm that arose out of nowhere raged fiercely. The sword light of Emperor Path shone more brightly, and the sword light was surging, crazily suppressing Wang Shengxiao and the other two who were in a passive position. Boom! The teaching building shook completely, and dense cracks almost covered the entire staircase. The sword intent of Emperor Path broke out, directly smashing Wang Shengxiao and the other two from the second floor to the first floor. Li Tianlan's pitch-black pupils were completely on fire. His eyes were dim, but the crazy scarlet once again covered his eyes. His pupils had completely turned into a daunting dark red. The sword energy had not yet dissipated. At the same second when Wang Shengxiao and the other two fell, Li Tianlan rushed down without hesitation. In front of stand number 3, on the huge screen, the picture suddenly froze for a moment. Li Tianlan and the other two completely disappeared from the picture. Only the cracked wall appeared on the screen. The wall was snow white. Only a sword mark was carved there. When a considerable number of people were a little confused, Song Ci, who did not appear in the stand but stood in another corner and looked at the big screen, suddenly looked extremely gloomy. She held the long sword in her hand tightly. After hesitating for a moment, the woman who had already given up rushed to the maneuver area without hesitation. The picture on the big screen froze for 5 seconds. Then it became light that filled the whole screen. Chaos. The whole screen seemed to be shaking in the loud roar. The blazing fire, the violent thunder, the bone-chilling ice, the messy storm, and the pervading smoke and dust merged into an extremely chaotic light and shadow. Light and shadow covered everyone's sight. Indistinctly, a few blurry shadows entangled with each other in the extremely chaotic light. Crazy. Everyone was fighting crazily. Wherever the four figures passed by, there was destruction everywhere. It was destruction, it was killing, and it was a fight to the death. Sword chi, iron fists, all the unique skills, and all the martial arts had become the most lethal killing moves. The figures on the screen kept moving, and the cameras dimmed one after another. However, the whole battlefield became more and more desperate. The light and shadow gradually dimmed, but the sword energy became more and more violent. The majestic sword completely tore the space, and all the pictures became blurred. Vaguely, a figure covered in blood was attacking the three opponents in front of him without any regard for anything else. There was no reason, no thought. Only fighting. That was giving up all the violence, with hysterical killing intent. There was no defense, only attack. The dagger of Kunlun City returned to Gu Hanshan's hand. The heavy iron fist. The cold dagger. The huge blade fell on Li Tianlan again and again, and blood kept falling. Li Tianlan didn't dodge at all, and took all the opponent's counterattack head-on. Crazy attack. Hao continued to attack madly. The dagger stabbed into Li Tianlan's body several times. The iron fist hit Li Tianlan's body countless times. The heavy blade of firmament whistled wildly and chopped toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan didn't care at all, no matter how serious the injury was. Fighting and attacking had become his instinct. He wouldn't stop until he died. In the blurred picture, several people fought from the first floor to the top, and from the top to the bottom. In the suffocating silence, both sides kept bleeding. Li Tianlan's injury was getting worse, but his combat capability didn't decrease at all. Everyone was staring at the picture on the screen, staring at the outcome that might be decided at any second. The heavy sword of firmament rose again with a violent trajectory, and the whole space trembled with the blade. Wang Shengxiao completely changed. He seemed to become as crazy as Li Tianlan. The majestic sword energy wrapped the huge sword, and he chopped toward Li Tianlan again and again. Li Tianlan didn't dodge. The wonderful body movements and the mysterious shadow formula had all disappeared from his body. Only the 24 moves of swordsmanship remained. In the face of the three strongest young experts in Zhongzhou State except for himself, he had the attitude that he would fight to the end even if he died. Kill, kill, kill. Wang Shengxiao's eyes suddenly became extremely frenzied. The heavy and huge sword edge suddenly raised a sword intent that ignored everything. He held the giant sword with both hands, disregarding his own injury, and chopped down with all his strength. The Wang family of Beihai, the domineering sword. It was pure domineering, conceited, and disdainful of everything. The sword intent didn't fluctuate at all. The moment it appeared, it became completely crazy. Boom. The teaching building, which had stood here for many years, finally exploded into pieces under the raging sword chi. This was the most thorough collapse. First, the foundation of the first floor was completely loose. The stone pillars supporting the stairs were shattered. Countless boulders flew out and collapsed from the bottom to the top. The second floor, the third floor. In the smoke and dust all over the sky, the whole teaching building collapsed layer by layer in the raging sword intent. The almost overwhelming ruins smashed down, as if to completely bury the four people inside. Li Tianlan's attack instinctively paused. Ninth secluded impasse. The moment the smoke and dust rose, Jiang Shangyu, whose face was pale, suddenly roared at the top of his voice. Gu Hanshan froze for a moment, and then understood that this was Jiang Shangyu's reminder to him. Without any hesitation, Gu Hanshan unreservedly opened the pseudo-domain that he could barely master now, covering his two teammates and Li Tianlan. The sound of collapse seemed to go far away at the moment when the pseudo-domain was opened. Jiang Shangyu was in the air, and his whole body was completely stretched out in the darkness. His arms, legs, and waist. All the power was fully mobilized by him in the shortest time. The dense sounds of joints cracking kept ringing in Jiang Shangyu's body. Jiang Shangyu's body began to glow. The light was not dazzling, nor was it blue. It was extremely faint but absolutely distant. Jiang Shangyu raised his arm. His movements were extremely clear, but they were extremely fast. The sound of all the joints was still ringing in his body, and his punch had directly blasted down without reservation. This was the iron fist of the Jiang family, but it had surpassed the unique skill of the Jiang family. He had been in the half-step thundershocking realm for 3 years. Jiang Shangyu's martial arts did not move. He seemed to have done nothing, but he had done too much and gained too much. This punch was the strongest move that concentrated all of Jiang Shangyu's essence, qi and spirit. His own killing move. 10,000 miles of starry sky. The wind of the fist carried an invisible power, vast and mighty. The faint light kept spreading along the trajectory of his attack, and instantly lit up the entire pseudo-domain. The dark pseudo-domain was not in the dark. The sky was full of stars. At this moment, it was not only the number 3 stand that caused a sensation. All over Zhongzhou State, and even all the major forces in the world, all the people who saw this scene were suddenly shocked. In this maneuver, they finally saw what they wanted to see. Maybe this was not what they wanted to see the most, but it was definitely the most valuable. Jiang Shangyu's punch alone made countless people feel that this trip was worthwhile. Because this was Jiang Shangyu's own martial arts. It was completely his own martial arts, which was most suitable for him. When Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan were exploring their own road to the invincible realm, with the help of the top inheritance. Without the top inheritance, Jiang Shangyu had been dormant for 3 years, and finally embarked on the most suitable and correct path for him. Few people knew that he actually had the Heavenly King heart. But so what if they didn't know? At this moment, Jiang Shangyu was a real young heavenly son, because he had his own path. As long as he kept going, the end of this path would definitely be the invincible realm. Wang Shengxiao had the wind and thunder veins. Gu Hanshan had the Heavenly King heart. As long as they grew up, they would definitely enter the invincible realm in the future. And now Jiang Shangyu was the same. The starry sky. This punch was heavy and grand, and of course, it was as vast and amazing as the starry sky. The wind of the fist rushed into the pseudo-domain with great power. The stars lit up one after another. In silence, a huge sword edge lit up in the pseudo-domain. It was the purest light. There was only one point, but it was as vast as the sun and the moon. The point of light lay between the darkness and the stars, floating forward. It was so natural, so clear, but so dreamy and solemn. Heavenly sword. It was not the heavenly sword of the Wang family of Beihai. It was the heavenly sword that belonged to Wang Shengxiao himself. He also found his own path. Although it was only a starting point, it also broke the inherent inheritance of the Wang family of Beihai. It was the most dreamy and dazzling light. It was solemn, vast and unparalleled. Ninth secluded impasse. The starry sky. Heavenly sword. At the moment when the teaching building collapsed, the 3 young heavenly sons made their most powerful attacks and their strongest trump cards at the same time. And the target was Li Tianlan. The wind of the fist was mighty all the way. The stars kept shining. Every ray of starlight was a bolt of lightning. Thousands of thunderbolts bloomed at the same time. And the sacred and solemn sword light of the heavenly sword suddenly spread. The pseudo-domain of the 9th secluded impasse began to twist wildly. There was no amazing destructive power. There was no huge momentum. Everything was silent. But the twisted 9th secluded impasse became darker and quieter. In the absolute silence, there were swords and starlight in the pseudo-domain. This was the real domain. The real domain of the invincible realm. The joint attack of the 3 finally broke through the limit of the thunder-shocking realm, and went straight into the invincible realm, forming the most authentic domain of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan was wrapped in the domain of the invincible realm. He was motionless. He let the starlight fall on him. He let the edge of the heavenly sword pass through his chest. He let the 9th secluded impasse twist and squeeze his body. Bang! His arms were completely blown up in the frenzy of attacks. His arms disappeared. His legs were shattered. His whole body was completely torn into countless pieces. In front of the number 3 stand of the Sky Academy, the forces belonging to the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City had begun to cheer. Wang Tianzong opened his eyes and looked at Gu Xingyan for a moment. Both of them saw a touch of gloomy killing intent in each other's eyes. And near the two, Han Donglu, the founder of Huating Flourishing Age Fund, had taken out his mobile phone and dialed a number. "Help me draw up an investment contract." After the phone was connected, he said with a chuckle in the cheers, "Okay, Boss Han." On the phone, the staff of the Flourishing Age Fund answered, "What kind of investment is it? How much is it?" "The investment of the Special Warfare System." "The amount?" Han Donglu thought for a moment and said, 10 billion. This. Even with the scale of the Flourishing Age Fund, such a huge investment still made the staff on the other side hesitate for a while. But she did not express any objection and just said cautiously, "Okay, Boss Han, which institution is the investment in?" Han Donglu narrowed his eyes and gave his answer with a smile. "East Emperor Palace." Mount Dibbing. Emperor Hall. Qin Weibai and Summer Solstice sat opposite each other, like two perfect goddesses, holy, cold, and inviolable. The stack of documents was placed on the tea table between them. A screen was set up in the hall of Emperor Hall. Two perfect women, who were similar in some aspects but not exactly the same, looked at the screen quietly. On the screen was the live broadcast of the final maneuver of the Sky Academy. Qin Weibai watched Li Tianlan's body being completely torn into powder in the real invincible realm. Her eyes were bright and dreamy, and the corners of her mouth were gently raised. She was smiling. For the first time in many years, she smiled so brightly and so happily. That was a kind of undisguised ostentatiousness. She laughed out loud, and the crisp laughter kept echoing in Emperor Hall. "Is it funny?" Summer Solstice looked at Qin Weibai expressionlessly and said coldly, "This is the funniest thing I've ever seen." Ha giggle, oh haha. Qin Weibai laughed and bent down. A killing intent flashed in Summer Solstice's eyes. But not to Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai seemed to feel Summer Solstice's killing intent. She paused and said with a smile, "Jealousy is the original sin. You are all guilty." "What about you?" Summer Solstice sneered and stared at Qin Weibai's eyes, showing her sharpness. "Me?" Qin Weibai laughed at herself and said, "I am unforgivable." Federal City of Star State. The White House. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State, who had been visiting Star State in recent days, was also watching the maneuver. He saw the three young chosen ones attacking with all their might. He also saw the bodies of the real chosen ones being completely torn apart. President Li Huaqing, who had been tense the whole time, had a smile on his face, and he seemed to be relieved. "It's over." He turned around and looked at a middle-aged man in a black suit beside him with a clear smile. The middle-aged man nodded and said, "President, when will you return home?" "I have to finish the work at hand." Li Huaqing smiled and said, "Tonight. We will return home overnight." South America. Indian Federation. In a luxurious manner comparable to the presidential mansion, the second master of the Jiang family of South America, Jiang Qianyan, who had the strength of the invincible realm but had civilized the dark world by stratagem, was also watching the final maneuver. Beside him stood a young man about 30 years old. The young man stared at the screen with a dignified look in his eyes. "I didn't expect him to go this far." Jiang Qianyan sighed softly. "This man is determined and has become enemies with the Jiang family of South America. Are you sure you can kill him?" The young man beside Jiang Qianyan was silent for a while, then slowly shook his head. "It's hard, but I will try." Europe. Fog Capital. In the ancient and huge castle complex, a pair of white brother and sister, who could be said to be the most powerful in Europe, were also watching the final maneuver of Zhongzhou State. The man was tall and straight, handsome, meticulous, and had a pair of pure blue eyes that seemed to contain a peaceful wisdom and tranquility, in addition to the depth of his deep blue eyes. Compared with the man, the woman in the golden dress beside him was extremely languid. This was a woman who was powerful enough to make people not dare to guess her age by appearance alone. Mature, coquettish, seductive, and lazy. Yet there was an invisible sharpness that could take one's soul away. She looked more like a mixed race, with black hair and a slender figure. The most attractive thing was her eyes. They were the purest and most dazzling golden pupils, not pale gold, but the purest gold, deep and quiet. She lay on the sofa and watched the maneuver quietly. Suddenly she chuckled and said, Is this the little guy supported by Samsara Palace and the Lin clan? I'm afraid Tianzong is going to have a headache. No wonder he contacted me a few days ago to borrow the murderous weapon. I don't know if he wants to deal with this little guy or the Lin clan and Samsara Palace. Neither of them is easy to deal with. She spoke in perfect Chinese. You want to lend it to her? The man beside her raised his eyebrows, his voice gentle and calm. I can't say no to that man. The woman giggled, not frivolous but enchanting. She suddenly thought of something. Do we have a lot of cooperation with the Lin clan? I won't interfere with your decision. And you don't want to interfere with the family business. Business is business. I have a pleasant cooperation with the Lin clan. The man shook his head with a smile. It's boring. I don't care about your business. Tianzong didn't ask me to do anything. The woman curled her rosy little mouth. You and Tianzong? The man hesitated a little and finally said, we haven't contacted each other for many years, right? Or can't let it go? Why should I let it go? The woman asked faintly. The man sighed softly and shook his head. You have no chance. All Tianzong's attention is on summer solstice. You should have known that it would end like this. What chance do you have? The woman frowned. Summer solstice is also. Then you have no chance. The man's tone was firm. The woman suddenly sat up and screamed angrily. William, you're meddling too much. She was neither ugly nor sweet when she was angry. Only a kind of frightening majesty. I'm your brother. William shrugged. So is Wang Tianzong. You're my brother. The woman laughed. But Tianzong, our grandfather's 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 father and Tianzong's ancestors were brothers. Their relationship is so far away that he is not my brother. I want him to be my man. William looked confused. The string of tongue-twister grandfather represented a distant enough blood relationship, but it also made him confused. My Chinese is not very good. William smiled bitterly. All right. The woman shrugged. I mean, my business has nothing to do with you. William whistled. Then you can lend him the murderous weapon. Or you can go and help him in person. The murderous weapon is already on the way. As for me, I have my own business. The woman shook her head. Have lunch with me at noon. I have a guest at noon. William looked at his watch with some embarrassment. The woman raised her eyebrows. I'm going to have lunch with the Queen. William looked helpless. The Queen. In the knowledge of most Englishmen, there was naturally only one Queen. I'm also the Queen, okay? The woman said angrily. William laughed and said nothing more. The woman put on her high heels and turned directly. I'm leaving. William waved his hand casually, and did not get up to see her off. He just watched his sister leave. He did not lie. He did have lunch with the Queen of England at noon. But his sister did not lie either. She was indeed the Queen. One was the Queen of England. And she was the Queen of the entire Europe. The Queen of Shadows of the Shadow Throne. A super dark force in Europe. Grand Duke Irene King Tong Wang Rothschild. William thought of the murderous weapon that was about to reach the Wang family of Beihai, and his eyes refocused on the maneuver on the screen. What followed was destined to be a picture that some people wanted to see, but some people did not want to see. He thought of the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. He suddenly felt a little funny. In every corner of the world, people were paying attention to the maneuver of Zhongzhou State and Li Tianlan. Wang Shengxiao, Gu Hanshan, and Jiang Shangyu were also watching Li Tianlan. The real invincible domain was constantly twisting. Li Tianlan's body was torn into pieces. After the strongest blow, the aura of the three people continued to weaken. But Gu Hanshan, who controlled the ninth secluded impasse to tear Li Tianlan, was laughing. He laughed wildly and proudly. The old enemy who had been pressing on his heart since he appeared was dead. There would be no Li family in Zhongzhou State in the future. Only Kunlun City. How could he not laugh? The wild laughter became louder and sharper. Gu Hanshan's face was distorted, and he did not hide his laughter. Jiang Shangyu was silent. Wang Shengxiao was silent. He quietly watched Li Tianlan's body being torn apart little by little in his sight, and he suddenly felt a little melancholy and confused. Sizzle. A subtle sound suddenly fell into Wang Shengxiao's ears. Wang Shengxiao froze for a moment. Sizzle. The sound continued to ring, and it was extremely clear in Gu Hanshan's arrogant laughter. It was as if someone had used their hands to gently tear apart a piece of paper or a dry leaf. It was gentle, yet cruel. Li Tianlan's body continued to shatter in the domain. But Wang Shengxiao suddenly raised his head and stared at Li Tianlan in the shattering. Gu Hanshan's laughter also disappeared. Jiang Shangyu also raised his head. In the sight of the three, Li Tianlan's body shattered faster and faster. But he was still calm and silent. Under this kind of shattering he had no pain, no sound, and no bloodstains. No bloodstains. Gu Hanshan, whose face changed dramatically, took a step forward subconsciously. Snap! In the subtle sound, Li Tianlan's body disappeared completely. It was not a complete shattering disappearance. Instead, it suddenly disappeared in everyone's sight. The domain had completely dissipated. The sun shone down again. Wang Shengxiao stared at the place where Li Tianlan had stood. There was no bloodstain or body there. Under the sunlight, there was only a single leaf that was still green, but had all of its water content sucked out, drifting down lightly. The leaf carried a faint and negligible sword intent, which made people feel desperate. The three young heavenly sons couldn't say a word for a while. Their hearts were extremely cold. They didn't speak. But someone spoke. It was so quiet and indifferent. You three. The voice sounded softly behind them, leisurely and quiet. Did you have fun? Bang. Accompanying this sound was an incomparably deep and loud heartbeat. The three young heavenly sons of Zhongzhou State looked back in disbelief. On a tree not far away in their sight, Li Tianlan stood there quietly, holding a branch in his hand. There was no madness in his eyes, only tranquility. His clothes were neat and new, so clean that they seemed to have never been touched. Unscathed, Wang Shengxiao opened his mouth, and a mouthful of blood gushed out of his throat. He choked and coughed. Li Tianlan didn't look at them. He just looked up at the sky quietly. In the dead silence on the number 3 stand, Li Tianlan's face was reflected on the big screen. Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyan stared at that face in silence. Li Tianlan seemed to be looking at them. The sun shone down warm and hot, bright and clear. That was the sky in Li Tianlan's eyes. It was clear, but there were still shadows. Chapter 381. Li Tianlan looked at the sky. The three young chosen ones looked at Li Tianlan. This was a dead, stiff, almost frozen picture. Large tracts of jungle were broken into powder, and the flat ground became a pool in the raging sword intent. There was still dust rising from the ruins of the collapsed teaching buildings and warehouses. It was a blur. Li Tianlan stood quietly on the top of a tree, bathing in the sun and holding a branch. The green branch seemed to have lost a leaf, but the other leaves were still warm, with the water stains left by the night rain and morning dew. They were very clean. The branch and the person were very clean. The fierce battle that affected everyone's mind and the eyes of the world seemed to have come to an end, but it also seemed to have just begun. He held the branch and stood casually on the top of the tree. It was clean and fresh, as if he was taking a walk in this battlefield. He looked at the sky. The three chosen ones, covered in dust and blood, looked at him. There was no anger, sorrow, or self-mockery in the silent and frozen picture. All the emotions seemed to be completely frozen with the blood. There was only dullness left. He stood at the peak of power, looked down on them, broke the rules, lost friendship, and did whatever it took to eliminate the threat in the future. In the end, he risked his life and was injured. When he should have been completely relaxed, he found that he just destroyed a fallen leaf, a sword intent, and an incarnation that the other party threw into the sky. What was his mood? Jiang Shangyu looked at Li Tianlan with a complicated expression. He was not unfamiliar with such a method, but he was absolutely not familiar with it. Li Tianlan, who was destroyed by them together, was not an incarnation. It was sword intent. It was the purest sword intent that belonged to Li Tianlan. The sword intent had been in their sight all the time. The sword intent did not deceive their eyes, but the pure sword intent twisted the void. The sword intent finally twisted into Li Tianlan's appearance in the void. It was an extremely powerful and pure sword intent. What the three of them saw was all an illusion after the distortion of the void. In fact, It was a fallen leaf and a sword intent. It was like a magic trick. A magic trick that only those at the peak of the invincible realm were qualified to play. Li Tianlan's combat capability was naturally no match for those at the peak of the invincible realm. But his vision, his knowledge, his thoughts, and even his will were close to the most mysterious and powerful domain. Wang Shengxiao's path was just a prototype. Jiang Shangyu's road had just begun. But the road in front of Li Tianlan had already led to the highest place. He was standing on that path, moving forward. All of Jiang Shangyu's complacency completely disappeared. Looking at Li Tianlan in front of him, his dull eyes became dim, and even a little desperate. Gu Hanshan trembled all over. His trembling was extremely obvious, as if he was convulsing. He used all the strength in his body to hold the dagger that he had used to stare at the fallen leaf not long ago. The blade of the dagger trembled along with his arm, cutting through the air. His face was completely twisted. After a moment of sluggishness, his heart was filled with astonishment, disbelief, and disbelief. In the end, it turned into a burning jealousy. How could the remaining member of the Li family, an ant, have come this far? What did he rely on to reach this step? The vision of the peak invincible realm, and the combat capability of the invincible realm. Why wasn't he the one who could do this? Who was Li Tianlan? What right does he have? Gu Hanshan gritted his teeth and stared at Li Tianlan, who was unscathed. Thinking of the fierce battle just now, he suddenly felt that everything about him was a joke. His eyes became sinister with jealousy, and finally turned into a surging killing intent and a little timid resentment. Puff! Wang Shengxiao spat out a mouthful of blood again. His eyes were already a little dizzy and blurred, but his will became more and more sober. The scenes of the battle just now replayed in his mind, and every scene seemed to be a merciless mockery of them. He didn't understand why Li Tianlan was so crazy, nor did he understand why the branch in his hand disappeared under Chen Mashua's sky-killing sword intent, nor did he understand why Li Tianlan had no sense at all. It turned out that the truth of everything was just because it was just a sword intent condensed by a fallen leaf. No matter how pure the sword intent was sword intent. Without life, it naturally had no thoughts and reason. The three young chosen ones of Zhongzhou State joined hands to fight against a fallen leaf. It was thrilling and soul-stirring, and they finally won. A fallen leaf. Such a beautiful story might have already spread all over the dark world, right? Wang Shengxiao raised the corner of his mouth. He laughed. The chosen one of Beihai, who was destined to shoulder the Wang family of Beihai for the next few decades, trembled with laughter. His laughter was inexplicable and full of self-mockery. But he was not disappointed. Not at all. When Jiang Shangyu was a little desperate, and when Gu Hanshan was full of jealousy, the helplessness and melancholy in Wang Shengxiao's eyes completely disappeared with the appearance of Li Tianlan. Flames flashed in his eyes, and eventually became a wildfire that burned everything. He who was the most seriously injured, was the first to raise the firmament in his hand. The huge blade pointed at Li Tianlan from afar, and the fighting intent soared. At this moment, there was no timidity, jealousy, or loss in Wang Shengxiao's eyes, only firmness and madness. Li Tianlan withdrew his gaze from the sky and looked at Wang Shengxiao. Wang Shengxiao stood straight, holding the sword, and his figure was as straight as a javelin. I lost today. Wang Shengxiao's eyes became more and more frenzied, but his tone was calm and a little humble. I'm sincerely convinced. He took a step forward with his sword, looked at Li Tianlan, and whispered, but the maneuver is not over. If you don't die today, I'm willing to chase after your back for many years to come. There was a flash of light in Li Tianlan's eyes. Wang Shengxiao's figure was reflected in his quiet and deep pupils, so clear. This was Wang Shengxiao. He lost the maneuver, became a laughingstock, and was seriously injured. But compared to Gu Hanshan, who completely lost his composure, and Jiang Shangyu, who was in a mess, the chosen one of Beihai did not lose the bearing of the Wang family of Beihai after all. He still dared to fight and draw his sword. In the stands, Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually became calm. He looked at Wang Shengxiao's firm and crazy eyes on the screen, and the corners of his mouth lifted imperceptibly. He had expected this situation. In Linen he had already vaguely perceived the height of Li Tianlan's martial arts. But before the maneuver began, he really did not expect that there was such a means to dominate the battlefield with a green leaf. That was the domain belonging to the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan's technique was very jerky, and there were too many loopholes. In the eyes of any invincible realm expert, or even a half-step invincible realm expert, such a technique was ridiculous. But it also meant that Li Tianlan had found the way to the peak. A green leaf fought with 3 young chosen ones. Such an ending could be described as extremely miserable. But in his eyes, his son didn't lose in a bad way. At least, he did not lose his faith, and he still had the fighting desire in his heart. Martial arts was like climbing a mountain, crossing the sea, and ascending to the sky. Who could sing all the way? Failure was actually not terrible. It actually took more courage to admit failure, and be willing to chase after the opponent's back. Wang Tianzong's palm stroked the famous sword. Listened to the sea beside him. His eyes gradually changed from calm to cold. It became cold. Li Tianlan stood on the treetop and slowly turned around. His movements were slow, but his every move affected everyone's nerves. His eyes swept over the sword in Wang Xingxiao's hand, ignored the sword energy on the blade, and finally stopped on Gu Hanshan. Gu Hanshan's expression was still distorted, and he even forgot to hide the jealousy deep in his eyes. Do you like to laugh? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and took the initiative to ask, so humorous? Gu Hanshan froze for a moment, and his face turned purple in an instant. He recalled his wild and carefree laughter as he tore that green leaf apart. That was simply the most humiliating moment of his life. What did you say? Gu Hanshan flew into a rage. Li Tianlan's eyes were still calm, and his tone was indifferent. Such a temperament is really a disgrace to the heavenly king heart. It also insults the 4 words of the young chosen ones. Kunlun City. It was impossible for his voice to reach the stands, but it easily fell into the ears of everyone present. Gu Hanshan, who was in a mess, suddenly had red eyes. That was not the unyielding fighting desire like Wang Xingxiao's. Instead, it was a kind of anger because his scar had been opened. He instinctively took a step forward, but then stopped where he was. Kunlun City, get into formation. His face was completely red, but he did not dare to do it himself. Instead he roared. Everyone who participated in the maneuver had arrived at the scene. The sword energy in the final hit formation that Kunlun City had prepared for a long time was mighty. This was a sword formation without a so-called core. But without a core, it did not mean that there could not be a core when conditions permitted. Gu Yulan, the personal disciple of Gu Qianchuan, and the founder of Jilei Peak, was standing in the formation at this time. Gu Yulan, who had not fully recovered from her injury, was pale, but she bit her lip tightly and raised the sword in her hand. In an instant, the killing formation, which was formed by more than 50 elites, exploded with a majestic sword intent. Li Tianlan slightly raised his eyebrows. His figure trembled gently on the branch. Without a sound, his entire figure continued to fade, and finally disappeared under the bright and beautiful sunlight. The sword energy of the final hit sword formation was surging and becoming more and more majestic. Gu Hanshan suddenly turned around and glanced around. Behind you. Jiang Shangyu suddenly raised his voice. Gu Hanshan quickly turned around. There was only sunlight, only the pool, only the sword formation, only Wang Shengxiao and Jiang Shangyu in his sight. Behind you. A cold chill instantly swept through Gu Hanshan's whole body. He turned around again. The dense forest appeared in his sight, but Li Tianlan was still nowhere to be seen. A great danger seemed to be lurking behind him like a shadow, but he could not see anything. He was turning around. Still nothing. What are you looking for? When the voice sounded, a hand was placed on Gu Hanshan's shoulder at the same time. All the hair on Gu Hanshan's body stood on end. With a roar, the sword intent that had been accumulated all over his body instantly flew in all directions. But the hand on his shoulder was still stable. The palm slightly tightened. In the case of serious injury, a force that Gu Hanshan could not resist directly pressed on his shoulder. Gu Hanshan roared fiercely. Bang! His body directly knelt on the ground. Bang! In the dull sound, Before Gu Hanshan had time to feel humiliated, a foot directly kicked him in the back of his heart. Red blood gushed out of his mouth like a fountain. Gu Hanshan's body directly flew dozens of meters away. Gu Hanshan endured the pain and climbed up as fast as he could. His eyes were cold and gloomy. There was nothing in his sight. Behind you. In the shrill reminder, Gu Hanshan reacted completely by instinct. He clenched the dagger and directly swept it backward. His body turned extremely fast, but he still did not see Li Tianlan. He only saw a hand. A hand clenched his arm and pulled it very gently. Ah! The severe pain made Gu Hanshan roar suddenly. His physical strength was as fragile as a piece of paper in that hand. His arm was forcibly broken in the pull. The dagger in his hand fell out of control and was immediately caught by Li Tianlan. The blade flashed with cold light in the sun, with a dark red color. Without the slightest hesitation, Li Tianlan stabbed the dagger into Gu Hanshan's back steadily. Blood splashed. The dagger was stabbed in and then pulled out violently. Li Tianlan kicked Gu Hanshan out again. Li Tianlan. In pain and shame, Gu Hanshan's whole face and even his voice became distorted. At this moment, he finally remembered a secret unique skill of the Li family. It was the legendary unique skill recorded in the Invincible Manual of Map of God of War. Night walking. This could be said to be the top, but also the most difficult body movement to practice in the dark world. It was also an almost invincible unique skill. It was good at chasing and even better at close-range assassination. In the battle of the same realm, once night walking took the lead, the enemy could never see his position. Such a body movement seemed to take advantage of the blind spot and absolute speed. But in fact, night walking pursued instinct and the grasp of the details of the enemy's body. Instinct was the fastest. This was a kind of body movement that used instinct to always keep pace with the enemy's movements. When practiced to the peak, once he appeared behind the enemy in the battle, he would always be behind the enemy until the enemy died. Gu Hanshan had the Heavenly King heart. At his peak, his will was absolutely focused. It could be said that he was the biggest nemesis of night walking. But now his mind was in a mess. Under Li Tianlan's attack, he had no power to fight back. Using the body movement that was most restrained by the Heavenly King heart to tease Gu Hanshan was the greatest humiliation to Kunlun City and Gu Hanshan. The dagger pierced Gu Hanshan's body. Gu Hanshan endured the sharp pain, tried to contract the muscles in his waist, and controlled the blood from gushing out. Li Tianlan stood in the sun with the dagger in his hand. He smiled softly. "You've played enough. Now it's my turn." In the final maneuver that day, the world should not only see his sword, they should also see the embarrassment of the other young heavenly sons in Zhongzhou State. There was still a lot of time. Li Tianlan only intended to play slowly. His eyes swept over Jiang Shangyu, Gu Hanshan, and Wang Shengxiao. Wang Shengxiao still maintained the posture of the giant sword. Li Tianlan's eyes swept over. He slowly closed his eyes. Li Tianlan's pupils constricted quietly. In his perception, the moment Wang Shengxiao closed his eyes, he was no longer alive. Under the sun, he was like a statue of flesh and blood. His vitality was disappearing. But the sword energy around Wang Shengxiao was unprecedentedly violent. The sword energy kept rising. It surpassed the previous heaven-killing stroke, and the heavenly sword in the domain of the three people's joint attack. He stood in silence, and there was only peace in him. His heart was calm, his breathing was steady, and his will was focused. Wang Shengxiao was completely immersed in the sword intent. Failure came first, and honor came later. In life, there were always occasions when one could not take a step back even if he had to give everything. Li Tianlan ignored Wang Shengxiao. Killing people's hearts. He couldn't kill people. But if there was a chance to completely destroy their minds, Li Tianlan would not hesitate to do so. He held the branch in one hand and casually threw the dagger to Gu Hanshan with the other, saying expressionlessly, "Continue." It was not Gu Hanshan who continued. As Li Tianlan's voice fell, Jiang Shangyu rushed up without hesitation. The so-called cooperation and the so-called future completely disappeared from Jiang Shangyu's mind at this moment. His essence, qi, and spirit were completely concentrated, his will was focused, and his heart was pure. Li Tianlan said he would play slowly. But he did not want Li Tianlan to play slowly. In the entire Zhongzhou state, under the gaze of countless forces all over the world, Jiang Shangyu did not want Li Tianlan to press him to the ground and ravage him. He was not born in the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, which were the super forces at the peak of martial arts, and he did not have the top inheritance. But he had his pride. Thousands of miles of starry sky. With Jiang Shangyu as the center, the sunlight in the nearby space dimmed instantly. The starlight lit up in pieces. Jiang Shangyu's figure stepped over the land and leaped into the sky. The whole earth shook with a loud bang. The faint starlight suddenly burst out. The stars were bright. The starlight that occupied the whole space attracted each other and turned into thunderbolts. The thunderbolts gathered on Jiang Shangyu's arm. Under the dazzling light, a large amount of thunderbolts condensed into a fist that was tens of meters long. Jiang Shangyu roared wildly, clenched the fist made of thunderbolts, and smashed it down hard. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm without any fluctuation. He looked at Jiang Shangyu, who was constantly accumulating power in the air. He watched the huge shadow of the huge fist that traversed tens of meters of space fall. The branch in his hand hung on the ground. He raised one hand. There was no starlight, no night, no thunderbolts, no sword energy. A sword was a sword, and a fist was a fist. His figure was extremely small under the shadow of the fist that was tens of meters long. But at this moment, Li Tianlan exuded a kind of momentum that could suppress everything. Under the shadow of the fist, he punched into the sky with the power of the sea. The air within a radius of 100 meters suddenly twisted along with his punch. The space exploded in the compression with a harsh sonic boom. The flickering but seemingly endless starlight was extinguished in an instant. The sun fell again. It shone on the shadow of the fist made of thunderbolts in the void. Li Tianlan's punch directly hit the shadow of the fist. Boom! In the dull crash, a large area of land between Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu continued to crack. The flat ground continued to rise and fall with the appearance of the cracks. Smoke and dust rose, filled the sky, and rushed into the woods like a gust of wind. Blood gushed out of Jiang Shangyu's mouth and his arm. His whole body trembled violently, and his aura fluctuated constantly. Li Tianlan didn't move. Under the collision of the two huge forces, his clothes and hair didn't even lift a little bit. Jiang Shangyu gritted his teeth. The violent power twisted the air. There seemed to be a thick wall in front of him blocking his way. The incredible destructive force pressed on his whole body. His bones began to tear, and his muscles were completely deformed. In the space where he couldn't move an inch, he raised his other arm again. Another punch. Another vast starry sky. The starlight quietly lit up in the storm of power. Under the sun, the darkness came quietly. Gu Hanshan, who managed to calm down, followed Jiang Shangyu and attacked with all his strength. 9th Secluded Impasse. 8th Supreme Sword Dance. Extinction of 5 elements. 3 elements final kill. Gu Hanshan seemed to have become a sword energy ejector in an instant. The dense sword intent kept whistling out with the vibration of his body. A large number of sword wheels and whistling sword shadows all rushed into the pseudo-domain in an instant. They combined with the starry sky and assimilated with the darkness. The vast starry sky and the 9th Secluded Impasse blended with each other. But Wang Shengxiao's sword was missing. Wang Shengxiao still held his sword and closed his eyes. The sword chi gathered crazily and covered his entire body. The sword energy was getting stronger and stronger. A large area of space fluctuated around him, undulating like stormy waves. There seemed to be a sea in the air around Wang Shengxiao. The heavy sword firmament was lifted up little by little. It was extremely heavy, but he seemed to have forgotten everything around him. He didn't move or speak, and he didn't draw his sword. It was Gu Yulan who drew her sword. It was the final kill sword formation composed of more than 50 elites whose realm was at the peak of the ice-condensing realm. In the domain, the starlight lit up. On the edge of the woods, Gu Yulan, who had accumulated the sword intent of the final kill sword formation to the limit, suddenly let out an extremely high-pitched scream. The silver mask that she had always worn on her face directly exploded under the constantly gathering sword energy. Her long hair fluttered in the sword intent. In the whistling sword intent, everyone saw her line up. It was an extremely beautiful face, very seductive, but a little childish and cold. In the soaring sword intent, her figure went straight up into the sky, with the sword intent condensed by dozens of people and her own strongest blow. She held the sword with both hands and rushed straight to Li Tianlan. This sword seemed light, but it was extremely strange and fast. Gu Yulan's figure broke through the air. Her figure was like a goshawk. She held the sword with both hands, and the tip of the sword lit up with a blurry light. It was like thunder, flame, ice, flying snow, and everything. All the light eventually became extremely fleeting. The light on the tip of the sword grew brighter and brighter. It seemed to be a sword that cut through the space. Wherever Gu Yulan passed, the whole space was fragmented and mottled, turning into a dark and undefeated color. She rushed into the pseudo-domain, into the darkness and starlight. Without hesitation, behind Gu Yulan, more than 50 elites of the final kill sword formation fell to the ground. Dozens of remaining members of the 6 teams rushed to Li Tianlan at the same time. Everyone had used all their strength. The young heavenly sun, the majestic sword formation, and the scattered elites. Charge, all of you, charge. Li Tianlan still stood where he was. The final kill sword formation made up for the heavenly sword. Everything seemed to begin to change toward the real domain again. Li Tianlan laughed. This domain tore apart one of his sword intent. Now that he was standing here, what was the meaning of this so-called domain? Gu Yulan stabbed directly at his chest with unparalleled sword light. Li Tianlan raised his palm again. He clenched his fist. He held the branch in his other hand. There was no sword intent. Just the palm. Just the power. But this time he really did his best. Crack. There was a clear sound of breaking in the silent pseudo-domain. Li Tianlan's palm didn't seem to be fast, but it just appeared in front of Gu Yulan. The starlight and the pseudo-domain were constantly torn apart the moment he raised his palm. The sword light shone on Li Tianlan's calm and deep pupils. His eyes were so quiet, so gentle, but so majestic. Gu Yulan's body froze in the air. With the sword intent of dozens of people and the strongest blow, she came to Li Tianlan and tried her best to scream and stab forward, but the long sword could no longer move forward. Li Tianlan pinched the blade with one hand. The violent sword energy hit the power storm in Li Tianlan's palm and kept trembling, but it couldn't move forward at all. The sword light, the starlight, the pseudo-domain, and the power storm. At this moment, all the destructive forces collapsed around Li Tianlan, whistling and flying. Under the flickering light he stood quietly, with his own general trend in peace. This was the picture he left to the world. But it was so desperate for the enemies who besieged him. Li Tianlan pinched the blade of Gu Yulan's sword and pulled it gently. He flicked his fingers. His fingers touched the edge of the sword, producing a crisp sound. The sword energy of the final hit sword formation was completely violent. The bright blade was completely broken in Li Tianlan's hands. The front end of the blade rushed to Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu with sharp sword energy and heavy power. Gu Yulan, holding the dagger, was swaying in the pseudo-domain. Li Tianlan's voice was very soft, but it was indescribably loud in the pseudo-domain. Goodbye. As he spoke, he closed his fingers. A punch. The broken pseudo-domain shattered in an instant. The power as vast as heaven and earth burst out under Li Tianlan's punch, like a mountain or a sea. The ground where Li Tianlan was completely collapsed. The pseudo-domain disappeared, the starlight disappeared, and the sword energy disappeared. There was no light between heaven and earth, only power. The heavy power completely blew away Gu Yulan, and at the same time, dozens of idle elites who besieged him were blown away. On the big screen of the Sky Academy, Gu Yulan, who bore the brunt, was torn into powder by this punch. One figure after another flew back under the raging tide of power. The majestic power shook the sky and never stopped. Countless people and countless swords danced chaotically in the tyrannical power. They gathered in one place and rushed out of the collapsed ground, bringing with them a rain of blood that filled the sky as they charged into the forest. The members who formed the final hit sword formation in the woods were directly rolled up. Nearly 100 elites and nearly 100 swords tumbled powerlessly in the air, and rushed to the depths of the woods for hundreds of meters. The incredible power swept all the way with people and swords. Countless trees in the entire forest collapsed and collapsed. Leaves and blood fluttered at the same time. In an instant, the entire dense forest was cleared out, leaving a straight passage of more than 200 meters long. Li Tianlan's figure floated in the air, expressionless. He was so quiet that he was almost nothingness. But under the sun, he floated quietly like an invincible devil in everyone's eyes. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Hanshan, who were forced back by a broken sword, trembled at the same time. They looked at the branch in Li Tianlan's hand. They looked at the pure punch. Their eyes clearly showed that they were on the verge of collapsing. Everyone stared at this incredible punch in a daze. Even Gu Xingyun's eyes were full of astonishment. How? His tone was a little difficult. How is it possible? He knew that Li Tianlan had wind and thunder veins. So in the battle between him and Gu Qianchuan said that Li Tianlan's power was incredible, but he didn't care. But this punch had gone beyond the scope of great power, at least beyond the scope of wind and thunder veins. Can wind and thunder veins do this? Gu Xingyun suddenly turned his head and looked at Wang Tianzong subconsciously. I can't. Wang Tianzong nodded. His son Wang Shengxiao also had wind and thunder veins. But even if his wind and thunder veins evolved to the highest level, it was difficult to do this with pure power. Wang Shengxiao's wind and thunder veins were difficult to achieve, whether it was strength or the speed that Li Tianlan approached Gu Hanshan. In his impression, there was only one person in the invincible realm who could do this with one punch. His disciple, Dijiang with double thunder veins. Li Tianlan also did this. What did this mean? His physique has improved. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and said faintly, "This is double wind and thunder veins." 2 chapters of about 8,000 words in a row. I want to ask for a monthly ticket. Ahem, brothers, please support me crazily. The word crazily support is really good. Chapter 382. Today's second big chapter. There will be a bigger one at noon. Don't miss it. It was impossible. This was the first reaction in Gu Xingyun's mind. There was no saying that physique determined everything in the dark world. But there were indeed a few special phenomena that were truly unique in practicing martial arts. Martial arts was the combination of body and will. The heavenly king heart was the easiest to temper the firmest will. The wind and thunder veins were the easiest to break through the limit in physical strength. This was the most precious congenital condition. Dual wind and thunder veins? Gu Xingyun had never thought of this concept, let alone heard of it. Tribulation with dual wind veins went further and further in the chi-controlling realm. He didn't enter the ice-condensing realm, the fire-flaming realm, or the thunder-shocking realm. Finally, when he was the closest to the invincible realm, he directly slaughtered the supreme ninja of East Island. That was the most awe-inspiring king of shadow on the killer list. Dijiang with dual thunder veins from the Wang family of Beihai had been in the world for less than 3 years, but he led the Tiannan Freedom Corps and shocked the whole dark world countless times. Before Tribulation and Dijiang entered the invincible realm, they were enough to make experts of the invincible realm feel like facing a formidable enemy. The strongest features of the two were concentrated in Li Tianlan. Dual wind veins. Dual thunder veins. This was equivalent to the potential of 2 Wang Shengxiao. How terrifying would the 4 meridians in Li Tianlan's body expand his potential? Absolute power, absolute speed. As long as Gu Xingyun thought about the future Li Tianlan, he felt a headache and even fear. The future was illusory. Gu Xingyun was very realistic. But in his current state he really had to think about it. It could be predicted that in the next few years, his injury could not be fully recovered. And Gu Qianchuan did not have the strength to check and balance Li Tianlan. Li Shi had this ability, but Gu Xingyun did not dare to fully believe in her position. Without the suppression of absolute force, a few years later, when his injury recovered, how terrifying would Li Tianlan be? Gu Xingyun's body trembled instinctively. He didn't want to admit his fear, but he was more and more sad in his heart. He suddenly found that in this situation, when the future deadly threat of Kunlun City rose under his eyes, the only thing he could expect was Wang Tianzong's courage. The Sword Emperor held a sword in his hand, facing the eyes of the world, the 40,000 elites of the Border Praetorian Corps, and the Dongqing clan. Did he dare to kill Li Tianlan with his sword? It wasn't that he didn't dare, but he needed support. But Wang Tianzong was seriously injured and surrounded by the army of the Dongqing clan. The last thing Gu Xingyin could give Wang Tianzong today was support. The future of Zhongzhou State is going to be lively. Gu Xingyin lowered his head, and his hoarse voice was filled with unconcealable unwillingness and anger. He laughed at himself and said, "Dual wind and thunder veins. With a sword in hand, I believe I can pierce through the sky." "I believe it too." Wang Tianzong nodded and said calmly, "But he has no chance." Dongqing Wudi, who was sitting next to them, turned to look at Wang Tianzong with indifferent eyes. "What does Tianzong mean?" "Boring." Wang Tianzong shook his head. "The future of Zhongzhou State may be very exciting and lively. I don't think it has anything to do with Li Tianlan." He listened to the sea beside him and slowly stood up. The world could not see Wang Tianzong, but all the eyes in the stands were focused on Wang Tianzong in an instant. Below the viewing platform, the vast and mighty army of 40,000 suddenly stood still, their killing intent soaring into the sky. Dongqing Wudi was not angry or irritable. He just looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. His eyes were indifferent and determined. It was a determination that would not compromise in the slightest. Wang Tianzong smiled softly. He looked down at the neat and tidy army of 40,000 soldiers. There was a sea of people as far as the eye could see. "I won't kill him," Wang Tianzong whispered. "But he shouldn't have such brilliance. The Li family shouldn't have either." Dual wind and thunder veins? In Emperor Hall Mount Dibbing, the conversation, which seemed to be chatting, negotiating, and confronting, was still going on. Summer Solstice saw the legendary night walking that only existed in the Invincible Manual. He saw Li Tianlan's punch, which could be said to be able to swallow mountains and rivers. On the screen, countless swords and figures were flying in the storm of power. Blood rushed into the woods with smoke and dust, and a passage hundreds of meters long appeared in the woods. In the punch full of death and destruction, Summer Solstice could only see power. The fierce power that could crush everything. "Is he handsome?" Qin Weibai's eyes were a little dazed. In her sight, Li Tianlan was floating in the air, expressionless. At this moment, there seemed to be only endless coldness and majesty all over his body. So familiar, so strange. The sword light, the crowd, the woods, and even heaven and earth were all shattered and dissipated under his punch. They were vulnerable. He stood quietly in the air, and everything around him seemed to be like ants. Qin Weibai smiled. Her delicate and dreamy face was full of happiness and happiness. Her eyebrows and eyes were curved. At this moment, Qin Weibai was no longer a cold goddess high above. She seemed to gather all the beauty and joy in the world invisibly. That was a smiling face that no one dared to look at. She finally saw what she wanted to see. She carefully pushed the chess pieces on the chessboard, and the result did not disappoint her. "Goodbye." Qin Weibai stood up with a soft smile. Summer Solstice froze for a moment and squinted at Qin Weibai. "The maneuver is not over yet," she said. "It's over. As early as the beginning, the moment Tianlan entered the maneuver area, it was over. Now it's just that all accidents have been eliminated." Qin Weibai shook her head. "Tianzong is still in the Sky Academy." Summer Solstice stared into Qin Weibai's eyes. Qin Weibai's smile slowly faded, and she finally said calmly, "So what?" She pointed to the stack of materials on the table. Summer Solstice had finished reading the materials. Qin Weibai didn't lie. This was a threat, the most direct, naked, and undisguised threat. "I'll give it to you," Qin Weibai said, then turned and walked out of Emperor Hall. Until this moment, she was really sure that everything had a result. A new era was coming. No force could suppress Li Tianlan and East Emperor Palace. The Wang family of Beihai couldn't. Neither could the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. Summer Solstice didn't go through the materials on the table again, nor did she give it to Qin Weibai. Her eyes fell on the screen again. On the screen, Jiang Shangyu and Gu Hanshan stood together. When all the elites were wiped out, the two tried to get close to Wang Shengxiao. Wang Shengxiao still stood quietly. The sharp sword energy around him became more and more violent. The thick and sticky sword intent filled every inch of space, completely wrapping Wang Shengxiao in the center. In the beginning, it was undulating like waves. Now the sea-like sword energy was roaring like a tide. Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu tried to get close, but they couldn't get close to him in the sea-like sword intent. Gu Hanshan seemed to realize something. His face changed, and he quickly opened his mouth and shouted. The thick, statue-like firmament moved slightly. Summer Solstice couldn't hear what Gu Hanshan was saying, but she saw the sword edge of the shaking firmament. The low-key and almost unknown expert at the peak of the invincible realm sighed softly. She felt that her son had done a good job today, but she would not ignore one fact. That was, except for the sword intent that deceived all the people on the scene, Li Tianlan had not drawn his sword so far. Are you crazy? When he couldn't even get close to Wang Shengxiao, Gu Hanshan finally realized what Wang Shengxiao was doing. His face turned a little pale in an instant. He looked at Wang Shengxiao, who was extremely quiet with his eyes closed. Gu Hanshan couldn't believe it. Li Tianlan floated quietly in the air. More than half of the 6 teams were dead or injured. The maneuver had come to this point, and it was already the last moment. Li Tianlan's heart was calm and indifferent. His aura had always been stable at an optimal balance point, neither high nor low, without any ups and downs. He held the branch that had been broken at the beginning of the maneuver in his hand, and a few green branches and leaves trembled slightly. He was as illusory as a gust of wind, but he was as real as the sun in the sky, with tranquility and heat that could burn everything. He was motionless. He waited in silence. He waited for Wang Shengxiao's strongest blow, and for Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu to join hands. The whole world had seen his sword, and it should also see his strength. He didn't think about the so-called Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State and the Sword God of Zhongzhou State. Now he was standing here, facing his opponents. He waited for his opponent's strongest blow, and then completely crushed all their counterattacks with the strongest sword. From today on he was the chosen one. There was no prefix of young. There was no suffix of one. The chosen one was the chosen one. The sword was the sword, and martial arts was martial arts. He has more courage than you. Whether it's facing the enemy or finding your own path, you're far behind. Li Tianlan said in a flat tone. I'm just more sober and calm than him. Gu Hanshan gritted his teeth and said coldly. His body was penetrated by Li Tianlan's sword. At this time, his whole body was tense, but the wound was getting worse, and blood had dyed his legs red. Under such circumstances, he still didn't quit the maneuver. Gu Hanshan didn't think he lacked courage. Calm. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. Under the eyes of the world, your calmness is cowardice. You lost the maneuver, lost your courage, and lost your boldness. When the glory of Kunlun City is gone, your heavenly king heart is a joke. I don't think what he said is wrong. A voice suddenly sounded, interrupting Gu Hanshan's words. Jiang Shangyu slowly took a step forward. What do you mean? Gu Hanshan asked with a frown. He's very strong. Jiang Shangyu didn't look at Gu Hanshan, but at Li Tianlan. None of us is his opponent. But no matter how strong he is, he's not invincible. We still have a chance to win. I don't care about this maneuver, but I have to get back the dignity and confidence that he broke. I don't want to give up my courage when I still have a chance to win. He glanced at Gu Hanshan. Your conservatism may be calmness, but I think it's cowardice if you don't fight. I'll give you a chance. Li Tianlan's tone was calm, but it was full of absolute confidence. You will all be under my feet today. After today, my opponents will no longer be you. Arrogant. Gu Hanshan's face was livid. Jiang Shangyu didn't speak. He just took a deep look at Li Tianlan, suddenly laughed, and walked directly to Wang Shengxiao. His body became hazy, and a faint blue light enveloped his whole body. Jiang Shangyu's aura began to rise wildly, twisting the space and tearing the ground. His figure was extremely heavy. Why? Gu Hanshan finally couldn't help asking. Jiang Shangyu's figure paused, and he said flatly, for victory. He didn't care about Li Tianlan's future threat, because it had nothing to do with him. He was willing to pay the price he could. All of this was because of his most determined state of mind, and victory. The roaring sword energy around Wang Shengxiao suddenly calmed down completely. It was like the sea after a tsunami, calm and still, but more dangerous. Jiang Shangyu walked into the sword intent of Wang Shengxiao. His steps were extremely difficult, but he didn't flinch. The starlight illuminated the sword intent like the sea. The quiet and still sword energy began to shine. Gu Hanshan's face changed. He hesitated several times but finally didn't move. He didn't want to pay a big price. In his opinion, both Wang Shengxiao and Jiang Shangyu were fools. The two fools stood side by side in the sword intent and starlight all over the sky. Wang Shengxiao, who had been silent for a long time, finally opened his eyes. He held the heavy sword of firmament with both hands. The heavy sword trembled in his hands. The sword energy all over the sky faded away, like a receding tide, and disappeared in an instant. Wang Shengxiao stood there. One man and one sword. It was simple. His momentum kept rising, but his essence, qi, and spirit began to slowly decline. In everyone's sight, Wang Shengxiao's short hair lost its luster, and eventually turned white at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was like a snowstorm falling on his head. But his aura was unprecedentedly calm and powerful. Wang Shengxiao laughed. With his white hair, his smile was bright. I have one more sword. Good sword. Li Tianlan's calm eyes finally became serious. But it's not enough. What about me? Jiang Shangyu suddenly asked. His essence, qi, and spirit were also weakening. His aura kept rising, as if he had broken through his limit in an instant. Martial arts cultivation, from the very beginning to climb toward the invincible realm, constantly breaking realms and becoming stronger, was to pursue more extreme destructive power. In the case that he couldn't break through for the time being, he seemed to have the extreme character of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Shengxiao took the opposite approach. So did Jiang Shangyu. They didn't break through realms. They were lowering their realms. After all, Jiang Shangyu's sacrifice was a little small. Wang Shengxiao was completely gambling. He took a big step back. From then on, he chased Li Tianlan's back. Under great pressure, he only had this sword. A sword that represented his whole thundershocking realm. He used the whole thundershocking realm as the price. This was destined to be the strongest sword that he had lowered his realm in his life. No matter whether he won or lost. This was all his fighting will. The road of martial arts was sailing against the current. Advancing a realm was as difficult as ascending to heaven. Wasn't retreating a realm as difficult as ascending to heaven? Wang Shengxiao held the hilt tightly and took a step forward. The distance between the two was less than 100 meters. Wang Shengxiao kept moving forward. His speed was getting faster and faster. The heavy firmament sword trembled crazily in his hand, producing a whistling sound that almost tore one's eardrums. The distance of 100 meters was covered in an instant. Wang Shengxiao turned into a bolt of lightning. This moment was the peak of his life. His mind was quiet. There was no victory or defeat, no future, no fetters. There was only his sword in his mind. His sword did not bring about lightning, nor did it bring about raging flames, nor did it bring about a gale. There was not even a sword qi. Everything disappeared on his heavy sword. A sword was a sword. Wang Shengxiao suddenly felt extremely relaxed, and his essence, qi, and spirit seemed to be constantly sublimating. He didn't use the 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai in the dark world, nor did he use any unique skill. This sword was just a straight thrust. He didn't think about anything, so he stabbed forward with indomitable will. Wang Shengxiao followed him closely. In the end, Gu Hanshan, who didn't choose to lower his realm, also rushed up. In silence, Wang Shengxiao's sword came to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's body floated upward. His body kept rising higher and higher. The branch trembled in the high sky. Wang Shengxiao was also rising. Boom. Without a sound, the entire training area was suddenly filled with a loud noise that shook the heavens and the earth. There was still no sword energy or sword light on the firmament. But as the sword went up, everything within a radius of hundreds of meters in the whole maneuver area suddenly rose. The broken tree trunks, the muddy pond, the scattered leaves, the flying dust. the ruins of the teaching block in the warehouse, and countless boulders flew up crazily under the sword. This required not only sword intent, but also speed and strength. Everything on the ground was rolled up and smashed toward Li Tianlan, covering the sky and earth. Wang Shengxiao held the sword quietly and still stabbed forward. The simplest and most direct. In the stands, seeing this scene, a soft smile finally crossed Wang Shengxiao's eyes. This seemingly ordinary sword was not a unique skill, but it was already better than a unique skill. With this sword alone, Wang Tianzong felt that he didn't come in vain. The sword light was getting faster and faster. Li Tianlan was getting higher and higher. The maneuver area was getting smaller and smaller. It was so small that the whole view of the maneuver area could be seen clearly, and the huge training ground and stands outside the maneuver area could be seen. Li Tianlan saw Song Xi, who had given up, rushing out of the sky in the woods. Her long sword rushed over with sharp sword light. She was also lowering her realm. Song Xi was desperate, gentle and decisive. The sun was still shining, but the sky was getting dark. Gu Hanshan fully launched the 10th unique domain. Starlight lit up in the 10th unique domain. The heavy sword firmament passed through the darkness and stabbed straight forward in the starlight. Song Xi, who had broken out to the limit, rushed into the pseudo-domain at the same time, with unparalleled sword light, like a meteor cutting through the night sky. There were no other enemies in Li Tianlan's eyes. Gu Hanshan didn't lower his realm. But in addition to Wang Shengxiao and Jiang Shangyu, there was Song Xi, who was also lowering her realm. The three of them joined forces, and became a private one. This blow completely surpassed the domain formed by the three's previous strongest blow. Li Tianlan finally lifted the branch in his hand. Wang Shengxiao's sword finally stabbed Li Tianlan. Everything happened in a second. In the blink of an eye, Wang Shengxiao's extremely powerful aura suddenly fell to the bottom. But the sword intent that he had accumulated and compressed to the extreme, along with all his strength and physical strength, poured out in the most hysterical way at the same time in this second. The sword intent went away, and the sword energy surrounded the heavy sword firmament. The pseudo-domain and the starry sky shook at the same time. A black spot appeared high in the sky. The black spot expanded in an instant, and became a huge vortex with a diameter of hundreds of meters in an instant. The vortex spun wildly. Endless sword chi with the most naked and crazy destructive aura poured down crazily. The sword energy penetrated the pseudo-domain and the space. The space of hundreds of meters was completely twisted and shattered, and the air was mottled. This straight stab seemed to really tear the sky. This was an all-out sword strike, at the cost of the entire thunder-shocking realm. After this sword strike, Wang Shengxiao would return to the peak of the fire-flaming realm. But the power of this sword strike was infinitely close to the real combat capability of the invincible realm. The sword energy broke out endlessly, vast and mighty in the sky, and never stopped. The pseudo-domain began to compress desperately. The starlight diffused and gathered into the shadow of a fist. Song Xi, who was also lowering her realm and bursting out with all her strength, screamed and slashed at Li Tianlan. The sky became completely chaotic. Li Tianlan's body was stained with blood, but his expression was still calm and calm. He put the branch upright in front of him. It was as beautiful as raising a sword. In the mottled sky, his figure seemed to disappear in an instant. He was in everyone's line of sight, but he was as illusory as an illusion. But the branch in his hand, which had never had a sense of existence, became more real than ever. This was Li Tianlan's sword. His swordsmanship. The sword strike with all his strength was also the most perfect sword strike he had so far. This was the only comprehensive move in his swordsmanship that he could fully master. It was the combination of cutting the sky and breaking the sea and other sword intents. Wang Shengxiao's sword converged everything and became a pure sword. But Li Tianlan's sword became heaven and earth at this moment. A crisp green leaf broke away from the branch, and kept flying in the distorted pseudo-domain. The moment the pseudo-domain collapsed, heaven and earth seemed to close without reservation. The whole world kept shrinking in the flying green leaf, getting smaller and smaller, squeezing everyone's space of activity. The green leaf kept swaying in the shrinking space, getting bigger and bigger, almost occupying everyone's vision. The pattern of the leaf became clearer and clearer, with the flowing sword intent. The whole world was extremely quiet, as if only this leaf was left. In the silent darkness, the light that filled everyone's consciousness suddenly bloomed. The speed of the leaf suddenly accelerated, crazily flowing with the sword intent that contained nothingness, but also everything. The world was unprecedentedly quiet. The mountains, rivers, seas, and the so-called majestic grandeur were all pulled down infinitely, so much so that everything seemed so illusory. Everything seemed to be frozen in the most illusory moment of the flying leaves until eternity. This sword strike was completely separated from the 24 moves of sword. This was a swordsmanship that had never appeared in the dark world. This was Li Tianlan's strongest move now. The eternal silence of mountains and rivers. The leaf passed through the quiet and shrinking world, suddenly speeding up in the seemingly far distance, with a touch of irresistible sword energy, real and illusory. Clang! The leaf hit the huge heavy sword of firmament. The dark and solid middle was torn by a fragile leaf. The whole heavy sword was full of cracks, and a leaf-shaped hole appeared on the tip of the sword. The leaf continued to drift, directly passing through Wang Shengxiao's abdomen, penetrating Song Ci, shattering the sword wound on Gu Han's Han, and finally rushed out of Wang Shengxiao's body. Blood splashed, dripping with dark red blood. Li Tianlan, whose body was also stained with blood, shook his arm. In an instant, all the leaves on the branch in his hand flew up at the same time. The world seemed to compress the real and the illusory again, and the purest darkness instantly lit up. The world seemed to be shrinking. A big hand appeared in the shrinking world. The big hand opened. All the leaves of Li Tianlan hit the palm of the big hand one by one, and then they were casually crushed into powder by the big hand. A huge pressure pressed everyone down wildly from the sky and straight to the ground. Li Tianlan was pressed down, but his expression was still as calm as water. Under the forever silent world, he defeated Wang Shengxiao, Jiang Shangyu, Gu Hanshan and Song Ci. In the end, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, the sword emperor of Zhongzhou state, appeared in front of him and casually broke his strongest sword intent. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Tianzong indifferently. Wang Tianzong stood in front of the 4 young people behind him. He looked down at his palm. The sun fell on his hand, and a drop of blood gradually appeared in his palm, dreamy and magnificent. Wang Tianzong's eyes narrowed. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.